ever get stuck, like really stuck. I was trying to plan a vacation the other day, and every idea, I swear, felt like, I don't know, staring at a blank wall.
It's funny how often we hit those walls, like we're trapped by our own thought patterns, those default settings in our brains.
Totally. It's
Yeah,
like we're conditioned to think in hierarchies, this, then that, branching out, but always from the same starting point.
precisely. Like those old family trees. Or even, when you think about it, the way we file away information.
Mm.
All very dot tree-like.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But what if there's a different model entirely? One that's less rigid, more, well, what's a good metaphor?
How about a rhizome?
Rhizome. Okay, now you're just using big words to make me feel like I skipped Philosophy 101.
No worries, no prerequisites for this deep dive. Rhizome actually comes from botany. But two thinkers, Deleuze and Guattari, they really dug into it as a metaphor.
Deleuze and Guattari. Those names ring a bell. Weren't they kind of known for shaking things up in the intellectual world?
To say the least. They were all about challenging conventional thought. And they saw the rhizome as a powerful way to rethink those hierarchies we were just talking about.
So, no more neat branches, no more predictable paths. I'm intrigued, but I need a little more to go on. What exactly makes a rhizome a rhizome? I mean, besides sounding cool to say.
Well, they use all these vivid examples. Rats burrowing in complex networks, patches of grass, even Amsterdam's canal system.
Amsterdam's canals. Okay, I never thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, all right, I'm hooked. Give me the Rhizome 101 breakdown. What are the key features?
First off, there's this principle of connection and heterogeneity. It's not like a tree where everything originates from a single point. In a rhizome, any point can connect to any other point, no matter how different they might seem.
So less about following a set path, more about making new connections as you go.
Exactly. Think of it like jazz improvisation. All these different elements intertwining, sometimes clashing, but always creating something new and unexpected. That's the beauty of the rhizome. It thrives on multiplicity.
So no more searching for that single right answer. It's more about embracing the journey, with all its twists and turns and unexpected connections.
Precisely. And this leads to another key concept, a signifying rupture. A rhizome can be disrupted, broken at any point, but it always finds new ways to grow, to adapt.
You can't kill the rhizome, you can only redirect it. It's less about sticking to a rigid plan and more about adapting to the changing terrain. Like those old maps, where they'd mark uncharted territories with "Here be dragons." It wasn't about staying within the lines, but venturing into the unknown and mapping new possibilities.
I love that analogy because exploration is so central to the rhizome. Deleuze and Guattari, they contrast this with tracing. Tracing is about sticking to established knowledge, to set interpretations.
Well, the rhizome is about being your own cartographer, creating the map as you go.
Exactly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. They talk about the importance of short-term memory in rhizomatic thinking.
Okay, short-term memory. I'm more of a long-term memory kind of guy. I like to hold on to things, for better or worse. What's so special about its short-term cousin?
Well, they're not just talking about remembering a phone number. They see short-term memory as a different mode of thinking altogether. It's about embracing the flow of ideas, making those connections on the fly, and then, crucially, letting go.
Letting go. So not getting too attached to any one idea, no matter how brilliant it seems in the moment.
Exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
you ever have those moments when you're brainstorming and suddenly you see a connection between two totally random things? That's your rhizomatic short-term memory at work. It thrives in that space between ideas before things get too fixed, too structured.
So instead of getting bogged down in what we think we know, we need to be open to new connections, even if they're fleeting. Kind of like, I don't know, improv bands. You respond to the music, the movement of your partner, constantly adapting and creating something new in the moment.
Perfect analogy, because it shows how this kind of short-term memory, it's not about chaos. It's a different kind of order, a more fluid, dynamic order.
Right. It's like we were saying before about cartography. You need that short-term memory to be open to new connections, to adjust your course as you go.
Absolutely. And this is where we start to see how the rhizome, it's not just a philosophical concept. It's a way of thinking and being that's incredibly relevant to how we navigate the world today.
So how does it actually play out in the real world? Give me some concrete examples.
Well, look no further than the internet. That's a prime example of a rhizome in action. It's a vast, decentralized network, information flowing in all directions, new nodes and pathways constantly emerging.
True, it's definitely more of a tangled web than a neatly ordered hierarchy. And it's constantly evolving, defying any attempt to control its flow.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what makes it so powerful. It disrupts established hierarchies,
Mhm.
creates new connections, empowers individuals in ways we never could have imagined before.
And it's not just the internet, right? You see these same principles at work in all sorts of social movements. Like, look at how grassroots organizations use social media to connect with each other, share information, mobilize people. It's like this rhizomatic structure allows them to challenge traditional power structures.
Absolutely. And notice how these movements often embrace a diversity of tactics, of perspectives. There's no single leader or ideology calling all the shots. It's that rhizomatic multiplicity in action.
Like a force of nature, you can
Yeah,
try to dam it up, but it'll just find another way to flow.
exactly. And that brings us to another example. Deleuze and Guattari use music. They actually compare music to a weed, which
A weed. Okay, I'm curious where they're going with this.
they're pointing out how music, especially improvisational music like jazz, it's constantly breaking rules, forming new and unexpected connections, evolving in ways that defy categorization. Just like a weed pushing up through the cracks in the pavement, music finds a way to disrupt expectations and create something new.
It's about that subversive power of music, right?
Right.
That ability to break free from conventions and create its own path. Messy, unpredictable, maybe even a little jarring at times. But that's all part of its beauty.
Precisely. And that's a key takeaway here. Thinking rhizomatically, it's not about creating perfect systems or sticking to rigid rules. It's about embracing the messy, the unexpected, the ever-evolving nature of, well, everything.
Okay, I'm convinced. This rhizome idea, it's a powerful metaphor, but I think we need to bring it back down to earth a bit. How can understanding this concept actually help someone listening right now?
That's the question, isn't it? What does it all mean for our everyday lives? Well, for me, the beauty of the rhizome is that it gives us this toolkit, a set of tools for navigating this increasingly complex, interconnected world we live in.
A toolkit, huh? I like that. So we've got this Rhizome toolkit. What kind of tools are we talking about? And more importantly, how do we actually use them?
Well, the first tool I'd say is awareness. It's about learning to spot the trees in your own life, those places where you're stuck in rigid structures, hierarchies, thought patterns, the things that might be holding you back.
Identify the trees. Got it. But what do we do once we've spotted them? Do we, like, chop them down, plant something else in their place?
Not exactly. Although the gardening metaphor isn't a bad place to start. It's more about recognizing that those trees, those rigid structures, they're not the only way.
So we start looking for the spaces in between, the unexpected connections that the trees might be obscuring.
Exactly. And that's where the other tools come in, the principles we've been talking about. Connection, multiplicity, adaptation, the power of short-term memory. These are all tools for approaching challenges in a more fluid, creative way.
Okay, so let's get specific. Say I'm feeling stuck in my career. I like my job well enough, but I feel like I'm just going through the motions. How would thinking rhizomatically help with that?
Perfect example. So instead of just thinking about the next logical step up the career ladder, which is very tree thinking, right? You could start exploring other paths that connect to your existing skills and interests.
So maybe instead of just aiming for a more senior position in my current field, I look for projects in other departments that might interest me. Or I could finally take that online course I've had bookmarked for a year.
There you go. You're already thinking rhizomatically. It's about seeing your career as a network of possibilities, not just a single linear path. And that same principle, it applies to so many other areas of life.
So if I'm feeling stuck creatively, the answer isn't necessarily to force myself to paint more, but maybe to try a new medium altogether, or to collaborate with someone with a totally different skill set.
Exactly. Or if your relationships are feeling stagnant, maybe it's time to try new things together. Have those deeper conversations about your needs and desires.
Basically bringing that same spirit of exploration, of openness to everything we do. Instead of getting caught up in how things should be, we can ask ourselves, what else is possible?
Exactly. And that, for me, is the most powerful thing about this whole rhizome concept. It's not just about critiquing the old ways of thinking. It's about offering a different way of being in the world, one that's more creative, more adaptable, more, well, frankly, more joyful.
I like the sound of that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of rhizomes, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
That's a tough one. But if I had to pick just one thing, it would be this. The next time you find yourself feeling stuck in your thinking, your work, your relationships, remember the rhizome. Ask yourself, where are the trees in my life? And how can I start planting a rhizome in those areas? How can I create new connections, embrace multiplicity, and allow myself to grow in all those unexpected directions?
It's a call to action for all of us to become cartographers of our own lives, to embrace the unknown, forge new connections, and create our own maps as we go.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, when it comes to life, don't be afraid to think and live rhizomatically. Ever have one of those dreams that really sticks with you? You know those ones, years later they still pop up when you least expect it.
Oh, totally. The ones that feel so real they could actually, I don't know, mean something.
Exactly. And some dreams are so powerful, they end up shaping how we see the world. That's what we're diving into today. The story of the Wolfman, a guy whose nightmares help change how we understand the mind.
No pressure, right? Just
Yeah.
casual dream interpretation that could redefine psychology.
Well, we like to set the bar high here on this deep dive. But seriously, we're going deep into psychoanalysis and philosophy today. Don't worry, though, no PhD required to follow along, I promise.
So we're talking Freud then. Classic psychoanalysis, right?
You bet. We've got Freud's original analysis for this deep dive, but we're also bringing in Deleuze and Guattari, D&G, to shake things up a bit, and even a touch of Elias Canetti for good measure.
Sounds like a party. What's the guest list for this little gathering of thinkers? What connects them all?
It's all about the unconscious, not just what's in there, but how it works. These guys saw the unconscious, not as some neat little box of symbols, but as this wild, constantly shifting world of what they call multiplicity.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Multiplicity, that's where things get really interesting. But before we get lost in the weeds, how about we back up a bit? Who is this Wolfman, and why should we care about his dreams?
Right, so the Wolfman wasn't actually a wolfman. He was a Russian aristocrat named Sergei Pankajev. Way back in 1910, he went to see Freud for help with some intense anxiety he was dealing with.
Freud, the OG of therapy. I bet he had some stories to tell. But why call Pankajeff the Wolfman? Did he have, a furry little problem?
You could say that. He had this super vivid dream about wolves sitting in a tree staring at him. It really freaked him out. And Freud, being Freud, he used this dream to illustrate some of his theories, especially this thing called the Oedipus complex.
Oedipus, classic Freud. Family drama, unconscious desires, the whole shebang. But I'm guessing there's a bit more to it, right?
Definitely. So Freud saw those wolves in the dream as representing the father figure. The idea being that we have these hidden unconscious desires for one parent and this rivalry with the other.
Right, and Freud was all about interpreting those symbols, those hidden meanings lurking beneath the surface. So the wolves were basically stand-ins for dear old dad, right?
Exactly. And Freud connected those wolves to this idea of castration anxiety, this fear that the father figure represents.
Yeah.
But this is where Deleuze and Guattari, or D&G as I'll probably call them, come in and say, hold on a minute, Freud, not so fast.
Okay, I am intrigued. What did D&G have against poor Freud's wolves?
They thought Freud's interpretation was, well, a bit simplistic, honestly. Imagine you're actually facing a pack of wolves. You wouldn't just see father, you'd feel that fear, that chaos, that raw energy.
Right, it's the difference between seeing a picture of a wolf and actually standing face to face with a whole pack in the wild. One's an image, the other is an experience.
Exactly. And D&G were all about the experience of becoming wolf, as they called it. They wanted to understand the actual feeling, the intensity of those wolves, not just what they might symbolize.
So instead of those wolves representing something else, like the father, D&G, we're interested in the actual experience of being confronted by those wolves, the multiplicity of them, the rawness of that encounter.
You're getting it. They argued that the unconscious isn't some kind of static code to crack, where one symbol equals one meaning. It's more like a constantly shifting dynamic system full of these things they call intensities and becomings.
Okay, hold up. Intensities, becomings, we're already diving into D&G jargon, and I am here for it. But let's maybe take a step back and unpack this whole multiplicity thing a bit more. It's not just about, having a lot of wolves in your dream.
Right. It's not just about quantity. It's more like, how do I put it? It's about how those wolves, or whatever's popping up in our unconscious, are all connected and constantly changing.
Exactly. It's not about counting the wolves. It's about understanding the pack. And for D&G, that's what multiplicity is all about. Things are always in flux, always relating to each other in new ways, transforming, never staying put.
Okay, I'm kind of getting it, but can you give me a visual? What does this multiplicity thing actually look like outside of a dream about wolves?
Sure, imagine a kaleidoscope. You've got all those little pieces, right? But it's the way they connect and shift that creates those amazing patterns, the complexity. That's multiplicity in action.
Okay, I can see that, but those are still just like objects, right?
Yeah.
What about like feelings or experiences? How does multiplicity play out there?
Well, think about it this way. Remember how D&G thought Freud was too focused on interpreting symbols instead of looking at the actual experience? Multiplicity is about diving into that experience, that messy, constantly changing flow of life.
Okay, so less dictionary, more choose your own adventure novel.
Exactly. And within this choose your own adventure, there are different types of multiplicities at play, each with its own vibe.
Like levels to this multiplicity game. Okay, I'm listening.
They actually borrow this idea from Elias Canetti, who talked about two main types, mass and pack. Think about a huge crowd of people, like at a concert or a protest. That's your mass multiplicity. They're large, often organized, and there's a sense of like shared energy within the group.
Right, like everyone's there for the same reason, even if they don't know each other personally.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the packs? We're talking literal wolf packs here, or is there more to it? We can totally think about actual wolf packs with their constantly shifting hierarchies and dynamics. But it's not just about wolves. Imagine a close group of friends or a team working on a creative project, even a high-stakes poker game. Packs are smaller, more about the unique relationships between each member.
So masses are like, a perfectly choreographed dance number, and packs are more like, I don't know, an improv jam session.
Love it. Masses are all about structure. Packs are all about flow. But here's the thing, we're not just part of one or the other. We experience both kinds of multiplicities in our own lives, often at the same time.
Right, like I might work for a huge company, classic mass multiplicity, but I've also got my close-knit friend group, definitely a pack, and don't even get me started on social media. That's like a whole other level of multiplicities colliding.
And those multiplicities, they aren't static. They overlap, they influence each other, they're constantly changing. It's like we're each part of this complex web of connections, constantly shifting and evolving.
It's kind of like we've each got our own unique multiplicity fingerprint based on where we find ourselves, who we're with, what we're experiencing. But how does this all connect back to, like, us? Why should we care about these different types of multiplicities?
Because understanding these dynamics, these masses and packs we're part of, it can help us understand ourselves better, our desires, our relationships, even how we experience something like love.
Exactly.
It's like love, desire, all those messy human things, they're not separate from these multiplicities, they're driven by them.
Okay, well, my mind is kind of blown right now. But it's making me rethink this whole love's about finding the one thing.
Yeah. Right. Like, what if it's way more complex and interesting than that? What if love isn't about finding a perfect match, but about connecting with someone's multiplicities?
Okay, I am so here for this. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. When you're really drawn to someone, it's not just about their, like, looks or their job. It's about something deeper, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's like you're sensing a whole world beneath the surface.
Exactly. D&G would say you're picking up on their multiplicities, all those different experiences, desires, intensities that make them who they are.
It's like instead of looking for our other half, we should be looking for someone who makes our whole even bigger, even more complex, like someone who expands our own personal multiplicity.
That is a really beautiful way to put it. And you know what? It actually reminds me of that famous Proust quote where he talks about feeling like he held his lover's entire body in his mouth just by saying her name.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's about experiencing that fullness, that depth, those multiplicities in all their messy glory.
Right. It makes you wonder if our usual ways of thinking about love, about relationships, maybe they're actually limiting us. Like we're trying to force something so complex and dynamic into this one-size-fits-all box.
It's like trying to capture a whole galaxy in a shoebox. You might get a few stars in there, but you miss the vastness, the beauty, the sheer wonder of it all.
And speaking of missing the wonder, it makes you think about the Wolfman, right? After years of analysis with Freud, even though Freud thought he was cured, the Wolfman still felt like something was missing.
Oh, wow, you're right. It's like, even though Freud tried to help him make sense of those wolf dreams to fit them into his system, the Wolfman still felt trapped somehow. Like he had all these other voices, these other experiences that weren't being heard.
And that, I think, is one of the most powerful things about D&G's work. It's a reminder that we don't have to force everything into neat, predefined boxes, that there's room for ambiguity, for complexity, for multiple truths.
It's like, instead of just seeing the lone wolf, we start to appreciate the whole pack, the entire ecosystem of the forest.
Precisely. And maybe, just maybe, if we start looking at the world through this lens of multiplicity, we might start to see things a bit differently, experience things a bit more fully. Who knows? We might even find a whole new way of being in the world, one that embraces the messiness, the complexity, the sheer wonder of it all.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am definitely feeling the wonder today. It's like D&G are handing us a permission slip to embrace the unknown, to dive headfirst into the multiplicity of life.
Absolutely. So next time you have a crazy, vivid dream, don't be so quick to dismiss it. You might be catching a glimpse of your own personal multiplicity. And who knows, it might just lead you somewhere extraordinary.
And there you have it, folks. Another deep dive complete. Until next time, keep exploring those multiplicities.
Okay, so get this. Today, we are dealing with a character, Professor Challenger,
Challenger.
who's this, like, crazy mix of Indiana Jones
Yeah,
and every college professor you've ever had all in one.
absolutely.
We're diving into Deleuze and Guattari's 10,000 BC, the geology of morals, and
Yeah.
they use Challenger to explain some seriously wild stuff about how the world is structured.
And I have to say, using a character like Challenger is actually brilliant. He's got this way of like mixing actual scientific theories
Yeah.
with totally out there references
It's true.
that you just like have to know what he's going to say next.
You really do.
It's so good.
It's like he's channeling ancient myths one minute
Right?
and dropping like hardcore geology facts the next.
Yes.
So where do we even start with this guy?
Well, Challenger's big idea is this concept of strata, which are basically layers of organization.
Okay.
You think about it like a layer cake,
Okay.
but instead of frosting in cake,
Yeah.
you've got everything from rocks and fossils to languages and societies.
Okay, so it's not just about like literal layers in the earth.
Right.
It's about how everything is organized no matter what we're talking about.
You got it. And what's so mind-blowing is that Challenger sees these layers everywhere. He even compares them to get these judgments of God.
Whoa. Judgments of God. That seems kind of heavy for a geology lesson. What's he getting at with that?
It's like he's saying these layers aren't just random. They actually shape how we see and experience the world. Think about it. We naturally categorize things, right? Living things, non-living things, languages, cultures. Challenger is saying those categories aren't arbitrary. They're built upon these deeper strata that influence everything.
So it's like these strata are like the invisible scaffolding that holds everything together.
Exactly. They're the underlying structure that influences how everything else takes shape. But here's where it gets even wilder. Deleuze and Guattari say each stratum is built through this process they call double articulation. And you are never going to guess what they use to explain it. Lobsters.
Lobsters. Okay, now I really want to hear where this is going.
Trust me, it makes sense. Eventually. See, Challenger says each stratum is formed by pulling from this chaotic mess they call the plane of consistency. It's like the primordial soup of everything and nothing all at once.
Oh, wow.
But at the same time, this chaos is being organized, given structure. And that's where the lobster comes in.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay the lobster wisdom on me.
All right, so picture a lobster with its two big claws. One claw is all about grabbing and crushing, right? That's like the plane of consistency, pulling in all this raw material.
Okay.
The other claw is all about cutting and shaping. That's the force of organization, giving structure to the chaos.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's like this constant push and pull between chaos and order, and that's how these layers, these strata, actually get built.
You're getting it. And what's so cool is that Challenger doesn't just use lobsters to explain this. He gives examples from all over the place. Like in geology, you've got sedimentation, where all these random particles settle in a disorganized way. But then through pressure and time, they get compressed and folded into solid rock.
So the sedimentation is like the chaotic claw-grabbing stuff, and the folding is the other claw shaping it into something solid.
Exactly. It's double articulation in action. And this isn't just happening with rocks, by the way, Challenger says. It's how everything comes into being, from tiny organisms to whole languages.
Okay, so if everything is built through this double articulation thing, what does that mean for, us? How do humans fit into all of this?
Well, Challenger would say that humans have our own stratum, but it's not as simple as it sounds. We're not just sitting on top of this layer cake, separate from everything else. He argues that what makes us human, our technology, our language, is deeply intertwined with our evolutionary past.
So we're not just these, like, rational beings who suddenly appeared on the scene, right? We're products of this whole long process of chaos and order, just like everything else.
You're picking it up fast. And that's where things start to get really interesting because Challenger's view of evolution is, well, let's just say it's not what you learned in high school biology.
So not your average textbook Darwin, then. What makes Challenger's take on evolution so different?
Well, most people think of evolution as this straight line of progress, right? Like things are always getting bigger, better, more complex. But Challenger, throws that whole idea out the window.
And brings in lobsters instead.
It's more about ditching the lobsters this time and embracing chaos.
Okay.
Challenger says evolution isn't about reaching some ultimate goal. It's about how quickly populations can adapt and change in response to their environment.
Okay, so more of a choose your own adventure kind of evolution, though.
Exactly. He even sets up this whole debate between two scientists, Cuvier and Jeffrey, to illustrate this point. Cuvier is all about fixed categories, right? Putting everything in its neat little box. But Jeffrey is all about fluidity, how forms can transform and blend into each other. It's like those optical illusions where you see a vase, but then it turns into two faces.
I see what you did there, evolution as an optical illusion. It's like our brains want to see those clear-cut categories, but evolution is way more messy and interesting than that.
Precisely. And that messiness, that's where things really start to get creative. Challenger says those moments of rapid change, those explosions of variation, that's where new species, new forms, new ways of being, come from.
It's like evolution is constantly experimenting, trying out different combinations to see what works. So where do we as humans, with all our fancy technology and language, fit into this wild ride of evolution?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Challenger says humans do have a unique stratum, one that's built upon all those layers that came before. But here's the thing. He doesn't see technology and language as something separate from nature, something that sets us apart. He sees them as extensions of our evolutionary history, just as much a part of who we are as our opposable thumbs or our ability to walk upright.
So we're not just these disembodied brains floating around in a technological bubble. We're still connected to that ancient, messy, creative force of evolution.
100%. Challenger even describes the human hand as a deterritorialized paw, which, okay, sounds weird, but it basically means that our hands, those tools that we use to build and create, are directly descended from the paws of our primate ancestors.
So even though we can build skyscrapers and write symphonies, we're still carrying around that ancient legacy in our very anatomy.
Exactly. And it's not just our hands. Challenger says our ability to use language to form those complex sounds and symbols is also rooted in our evolutionary past. He talks about how our ancestors moving onto the open steppe, having to communicate over long distances, might have actually influenced the development of our vocal cords.
So you're telling me that our ability to gossip and debate and share deep thoughts, that all goes back to our ancestors yelling at each other across the savannah?
Maybe. It's classic Challenger taking these seemingly disparate things like the shape of our mouths and the evolution of language and showing how they're actually interconnected in these surprising, mind-blowing ways.
It's like he's constantly pulling back the curtain, showing you the hidden connections behind everything. Okay, so our bodies, our technology, our very language, it's all part of this continuous flow of evolution. But with all this talk about strata and layers, I have to ask, is Challenger saying there's some kind of hierarchy? Are humans at the top of the heap because we've got this human stratum?
That's where things get really interesting because Deleuze and Guattari weren't about hierarchies, right? They were all about challenging those traditional ways of thinking. They'd say that every stratum has its own unique value and complexity. It's not about being better or worse. It's about recognizing the incredible diversity of ways that things can be organized and expressed in the universe.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. But if there's no hierarchy, what about meaning? How do we make sense of the world if everything is always changing and there's no fixed point of reference?
Well, that's where Challenger takes us on a wild ride into the nature of signs and symbols. And you better buckle up because this is where things get really meta.
All right, hit me with the meta. What does Professor Challenger have to say about signs and symbols? It sounds like we're going deeper into the matrix here.
Hold on tight because Challenger really doesn't hold back here. He's basically asking, do signs and symbols actually capture the world as it really is? Or are they just tools that we use to impose our own order on things?
So is language just this big fat illusion we create to, make sense of things?
Kind of. Challenger goes on this whole rant about how people think language is the key to, like, unlocking the universe's secrets. And he's like, hold up, there's a whole lot more going on that we can't even put into words.
You know, now that you mention it, I've totally had moments where I'm trying to, like, explain something I'm feeling or experiencing, and words just fail.
Totally.
Like trying to describe a dream or that aha moment when you finally grasp a new concept.
Exactly. It's like language is only capturing this tiny sliver of what's actually going on.
Right.
And Challenger would argue that this isn't a bad thing. It's actually a sign of how complex and multifaceted the world really is.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better about my vocabulary limitations. So if language can't fully capture reality, what does Challenger suggest we do? Throw away our dictionaries and communicate through, like, interpretive dance.
Not necessarily. He does talk about these different types of signs, like indexes, symbols, and icons.
Okay.
He's basically saying that not all signs are created equal.
Okay.
Some are more direct, more connected to the things they represent. Think about, like, animal tracks, for example.
Right.
They're not language, but they tell you something very real about what happened in that spot.
So, like, pay more attention to the subtle signs and signals around us rather than getting caught up in, endless word games. Look for meaning beyond the literal.
You got it. And maybe even be a little suspicious of, like, grand narratives that try to explain everything with one big theory.
Right, right.
Remember those judgments of God that Challenger was talking about earlier?
Mm.
He's basically saying that those fixed categories and hierarchies, they can blind us to the, dynamic, ever-changing nature of reality.
So embrace the chaos, ditch the dogma, and maybe try to learn a little something from those animal tracks in the process.
Now you're thinking like Deleuze and Guattari. Remember that wild ending where Challenger dissolves into this chaotic mechanosphere?
How could I forget? It was like something out of a David Cronenberg movie.
Well, on one level, it's about the limits of our own understanding, right? Like, we can try to categorize and analyze everything,
Right.
but there's always going to be this element of mystery,
Yeah.
this force of chaos that we can't fully grasp.
So it's about accepting that we don't have all the answers, that maybe the real journey is about asking better questions and being open to, new possibilities.
Exactly. And that maybe those aha moments, those flashes of insight that we can't always put into words, they're actually glimpses of something much bigger than ourselves, something that language can only point towards, but never fully capture.
Wow, that's a pretty mind-blowing thought to end on. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little, overwhelmed by all the strata and chaos and lobster.
Don't worry, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
Even like dipping your toes into Deleuze and Guattari's world is a wild ride.
But here's the thing. What if all this talk about strata and signs and the limits of language, what if it isn't just some abstract philosophy? What if it's actually a call to action, a challenge to see the world with fresh eyes, to question our assumptions, and maybe even to embrace a little bit of that, creative chaos in our own lives?
That's the beauty of a deep dive like this, right? It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about, like, sparking your curiosity, getting you to ask your own questions, and maybe even inspiring you to look for those hidden connections in everything from your daily routine to the vastness of the universe.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder. Until next time, happy exploring.
Ever get this feeling like there's more to language than, just the words themselves?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like it's doing something to us, shaping how we think, how we act, even if we don't realize it.
Absolutely. It's sneaky like that.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We're looking at excerpts from, this might sound kind of dense, but Postulates of Linguistics.
Ah, Deleuze and Guattari.
Yeah. Have you read it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild ride.
Right. Those two were not afraid to turn some ideas upside down.
Not at all. They make you work for it, but it's worth it.
Totally agree. And one of their big ideas, I think the core concept really is order words.
Yeah, the forces behind the words.
Exactly. And there was this one line that just jumped out at me. Language is made not to be believed, but to be obeyed.
Powerful stuff.
Right. Like suddenly I'm noticing how often we're not just sharing information, but kind of giving commands, even in subtle ways.
Oh, for sure. It's like every sentence has a certain weight to it, a force that goes beyond the actual meaning of the words. That's what they're getting at with order words.
So it's not always a direct order like, go do this.
Right. Think about it. A doctor's diagnosis, your parents saying something, even a friend making a suggestion.
It carries this weight.
Exactly. It can influence what you do without you even realizing it,
Yeah, totally. Like it's not just a dictionary definition. It hits you somewhere deeper. almost unconsciously.
That's it. And they even say, and this is a bit intense, but they say every order word carries a little death sentence.
Okay, yeah, that one stopped me in my tracks the first time I read it.
Huh. Yeah, they like to make you think. But they're not talking about, actual death. They mean that these order words kind of limit what's possible, closed doors, so to speak.
Ah, okay, I'm starting to see it now.
Like when a judge says guilty, right there, boom, possibilities change regardless of what actually happened.
Wow, yeah, it's like that word, that order word, reshapes someone's whole reality.
Exactly. And it happens in small ways all the time. Like think about saying, I love you.
Oh, loaded phrase.
Right. In a good relationship, it's great. But in a bad one, it's a plea, a way to manipulate even a weapon.
It's the same words, but the order word is totally different depending on the situation, the context, making me rethink every conversation I've ever had.
It's mind-blowing, right? And they don't just keep it to like one-on-one stuff either. They say this is happening on a much bigger scale, too.
Oh, like how? Give me an example of that.
Well, they talk about Lenin, during the Russian Revolution and his slogans.
Right.
All power to the Soviets. It wasn't just catchy, it was an order word that got people going. It changed how they saw power, made them act.
You even say it only worked for a certain time, right?
Good.
Like even the most powerful order word has an expiration date.
Exactly. Language isn't static, it's alive. It's constantly changing based on how and when it's used.
This is making me think it's not just that language reflects history, it's like it's making history.
100%.
And Deleuze and Guattari don't stop there, do they? They take this language and power thing even further. So language can be kind of scary like that, huh? This tool for control we might not even realize we're using.
Yeah, it can be a bit unnerving when you start to really see it.
But Deleuze and Guattari, they don't leave us hanging with this kind of bleak picture. They give us a way out, at least potentially, from these order words.
Right. And that's where this whole assemblages idea comes in. One of their most, I'd say, mind-bending concepts.
Yeah, assemblage. I got to admit, first time I saw that, I was like, okay, what is this? It felt very abstract.
It can be.
Yeah.
But it's basically, think of it like how different things like actual objects, people, ideas, even language itself all come together.
Okay, so it's not just the words. It's like the bigger system they're part of, right?
Exactly. They form these systems, these structures, even networks of power. Think of a factory, right? You've got the building, the machines, the materials. That's part of the assemblage.
Okay, I'm with you.
But then there are also the workers, the managers, the bosses, all with their own roles, their own relationship to power, right?
Right, and then the rules, the schedules, the way they talk to each other.
Exactly. And that's all expressed, even reinforced through language. It's all part of this one big assemblage.
So it's not just a workplace. It's this whole system of power, all these different things interacting, and language is like the glue.
That's a great way to put it. And within these assemblages, there's always friction points. Deleuze and Guattari say there are these places where the system can be messed with, disrupted. They call them lines of flight.
Lines of flight, I like that. So we're all kind of trapped in these assemblages, but there's always a way out, a way to escape.
In a way, yeah. And a line of flight, it's not always this big dramatic thing. It can be subtle, like changing how you see something, expressing yourself in a way that challenges the norm.
Right. Or even humor, right? Like laughing at something that's supposed to be serious.
Exactly. It disrupts the whole thing. It's like what we were saying about stammering, remember?
Yeah.
Deleuze and Guattari see it as a powerful act. It breaks the flow, makes you notice the language itself, the assumptions baked into it. It's a line of flight.
Wow, okay. So how do we learn to spot these lines of flight? These chances to shake things up within all these systems we're caught in?
Well, one way is to really listen to the people, the voices that are usually ignored, the ones on the margins.
It's like we got to look for those weak spots, those places where the usual way of doing things, it just kind of falls apart, and then something new can pop up.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where Deleuze and Guattari, they bring in this idea of major and minor languages, which, and I know this is going to sound weird, but it doesn't have anything to do with how many people speak it.
Right. It's not about if it's an official language or something.
Right. When I say major language, they mean any language that's all about making everything the same, smoothing out differences, having one set of rules, one meaning for everything.
So it's like a language becomes major, becomes this tool for control when it's used to keep the people in power.
Yeah, you could say that. It's like when someone says a dialect is wrong or you can't use it at work. That's the major language flexing its muscles.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then where do the minor languages fit in? They're just fighting back against that.
It's more than just fighting back. It's about creating something new. Deleuze and Guattari see these minor languages as the ones that are always changing things up, playing with the rules, finding new ways to say things.
So it's like what we were talking about before, those lines of flight we were talking about, finding those spaces within the system.
Exactly. Think about how social movements use language.
Oh, yeah.
They take words we all know and give them this whole new power, this urgency. Or think about writers, how they mess with grammar, make up words, even use multiple languages at once.
Like they're breaking language apart and putting it back together in a whole new way.
Exactly. It's about showing that language, it can be this force for change, for reimagining how we think, how we see the world.
So it's not just about, like, speaking truth to power. It's about finding a way to speak that power just can't control.
Yeah.
That opens up these whole new ways of being.
You got it. And what I love about Deleuze and Guattari is they make you realize we're not just stuck with the language we're given. We can all be part of this constant, evolution of language.
So every time we talk, every sentence, it's a chance to either keep things the same or shake things up a bit.
Totally. And those little choices, those little rebellions in how we talk, they can have a ripple effect, open things up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
This has been amazing. Seriously, I don't think I'll ever look at language the same way again.
That's the goal. Because once you start seeing how language can be used to control, but also to liberate, it's like you can use it more powerfully, more intentionally to shape the world around you.
So next time I'm writing an email or just chatting with someone, even reading a news article, I should be thinking, okay, what are the order words here? What systems are at play? And how can I maybe, mess with it a little, open up some space for something new?
There you go. It's about being aware of how language is working on you, even when you don't realize it.
It's wild. It's like language isn't just this tool. It's this whole field of power and creation and ultimately change.
Well said. Couldn't have put it better myself.
And I think on that note, we'll wrap it up. Hopefully this gives everyone listening something to think about.
Lots to chew on.
So until next time, keep an ear out for those order words. And don't be afraid to create a few lines of flight of your own. Ever get that feeling like there's more to life than meets the eye? Like we're all kind of just, reading from a script we didn't even know existed?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's where things get really interesting because that's what we're diving into today, semiotics.
It's a fascinating world.
It is. And no, you don't need a philosophy degree to keep up. We're talking about how we create meaning, like literally everywhere, from the clothes we wear to, even just scrolling through TikTok. Right.
It's amazing how we just go through life, assuming that these interpretations are our own.
Yeah.
Without realizing that there are these kind of invisible forces at play.
Totally.
That shape our thoughts.
Our guides for this deep dive are two thinkers who saw these forces everywhere, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. And they weren't just philosophers. They were like, intellectual detectives or something.
They really did kind of dig into everything.
Everything. Psychiatry, history, anthropology.
Yeah.
All to understand how meaning is constructed. And for this deep dive, we're focusing on their work, Thousand Plateaus, specifically their chapter on regimes of signs.
And in this chapter, they introduce this idea of the signifying regime, which is a real eye-opener. They argue that signs, so words, images, even events, they don't just represent things in a straightforward way.
Right.
They're constantly pointing to other signs, creating this never-ending chain of meaning.
It's like when you're over-analyzing a text from your partner.
Oh, exactly.
And you're reading into every emoji, every lowercase letter, trying to decipher some hidden message.
It's like we're hardwired to search for meaning.
Totally.
Even when it sends us down this rabbit hole of just overthinking. But what's really interesting is how Deleuze and Guattari connect this signifying regime to power dynamics.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So it's not just misinterpreting a text message. There's a bigger picture here.
Absolutely. Just think about how a king, for example, projects their authority. It's not just through their words, it's their symbols of power. The crown, the throne, those elaborate ceremonies.
Total.
It's all orchestrated in this very deliberate way to maintain control and shape how people interpret their rule.
So like a king's big coronation ceremony.
Yes.
It's not just for show. It's like semiotics in action.
Exactly. And it's not just kings. Think about dictators who control the media.
Okay.
Even a boss who uses a certain tone of voice to kind of assert their authority.
Right.
It's all about using signs and symbols to influence how other people see the world.
That's kind of unsettling when you think about it, like how much of our reality is being shaped by forces we might not even be aware of.
It is, but the first step to kind of reclaiming your power is to understand how these systems work.
Which is what we're doing in this deep dive.
Yes.
And this signifying regime, it goes way beyond kings and dictators. Deleuze and Guattari even argue it influences something as personal as our own faces.
Our faces.
Yeah, and that's what we'll uncover right after the break.
And we're back, diving into Deleuze and Guattari's ideas about how we create meaning and how power kind of sneaks its way in.
Right, it's a bit of a mind meld. Totally. Before the break, we were talking about this whole signifying regime thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I find so fascinating, I mean, it's kind of creepy when you actually think about it, is how our faces, our own faces, become these tools in this system.
Oh, tell me more.
Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about the face as being like this ultimate canvas for control and manipulation.
It's so true, though. We are constantly, like, reading each other's faces for cues and stuff. You know?
All the time. Think about how much we communicate with just a raised eyebrow.
Oh, totally.
A smile, a frown. Deleuze and Guattari are pointing out how these expressions can be used to, like, enforce social norms.
Right, right.
To reward or punish behavior even. To create this whole feedback loop that keeps us all in line.
And it feels like with social media and stuff,
Oh, gosh.
it's even more, I don't know.
It's intense.
Intense, yeah. Like, you know, filters. Everybody's curating their online persona.
It's this pressure to present this perfect version of ourselves.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't feel authentic.
It's exhausting. Like, we have to be performing all the time. But okay, so if this signifying regime is all about control, then what happens when someone or something steps out of line?
That's where things get even more interesting. Deleuze and Guattari say that any system of control, it needs some kind of a pressure valve.
Okay, yeah.
A way to, get rid of anything that threatens its power.
Right.
They call this a line of flight. It's like a way to escape those constraints.
So like a line of flight is like I don't know, like a glitch in the matrix or something.
Yeah.
A way to like break free from the program. Yeah. A way to subvert the programming. But here's where things get, well, a little dark.
Uh-oh.
Often, instead of, embracing these lines of flight, seeing them as opportunities for change, the signifying regime, it tries to neutralize them by creating what they call scapegoats.
Ah, classic. Blame it on someone else.
Right. Keeps the system running smoothly. Deleuze and Guattari, they have this very chilling phrase, the becoming animal of the scapegoat. They describe how certain individuals, or even entire groups of people, are dehumanized, stripped of their individuality, all so they can be blamed for society's problems.
It's a tale as old as time, right? Create an enemy and suddenly nobody's paying attention to the real issues.
And it's a distraction. It's very effective. Sadly, we see it all the time throughout history. Think about how certain groups have been marginalized and demonized.
Yeah.
Often for, like, really arbitrary reasons, based on fear or...
Prejudice, yeah.
Exactly.
So how do we break free from this? Like, is it even possible to escape the signifying regime?
Deleuze and Guattari think it is, and that's where this idea of a post-signifying regime comes in. But that is a whole other rabbit hole we're going to have to dive into after the break.
Okay, so we're back. We've gone pretty deep down the rabbit hole here.
We have.
Talking about power, control, scapegoats. Starting to feel like a bit of a dystopian novel, to be honest.
Yeah, I can see that. But, Deleuze and Guattari, they're not all doom and gloom.
True, true. They want to give us some tools to deal with this stuff.
Exactly. They want to offer us a way out.
All right. And before the break, we were just getting to this idea of a post-signifying regime, this way of, like, breaking free from the system. So how do we actually do that? How do we escape?
Well, if the signifying regime is all about, these really rigid, fixed meanings, top-down control, the post-signifying regime, this is about your own, like, individual experience. It's about creating your own lines of flight.
I like it.
It's about embracing the fact that meaning can be fluid.
Right.
It's about finding new ways to, to connect with the world.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
Right.
But I have to admit, it does sound a little, like, abstract. Like, do Deleuze and Guattari give us, like, any concrete examples of how this actually works in practice?
I do. One of the big ones is when they talk about the Jewish people rejecting the Egyptian signifying system.
Oh, interesting.
And this wasn't just, about refusing to be ruled by, like, another pharaoh. It was about rejecting a whole way of seeing the world, of interpreting the world.
So they were like, we are writing our own story now.
Exactly. They talk about it in terms of proceeding and grievance, like acknowledging the injustices of the past, for sure, but not letting those define you.
Right.
It's about moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
Creating a new future on your own terms.
It's that moment when, like, you realize you've been living your life according to someone else's expectations, and then you're like, nope, I'm done. I'm going to go follow my bliss.
Yeah. And it's not always, just these individual transformations. It can be collective, too. Think about all the amazing social movements that have challenged the status quo, the civil rights movement,
Right.
the feminist movement, LGBTQ rights, all of that. These are all examples of people coming together and saying, we're going to create new meanings. We're going to rewrite the script of society.
Totally, yeah. But how does this all connect back to, our everyday lives? We're not all like leading revolutions or starting new religions or anything.
True. But this post-signifying regime, it's not just about these, big grand gestures.
Okay.
It's also about those small acts of rebellion,
Yeah, like that.
The moments when we say, no, I'm not going to conform to your really limited expectations. It's about finding your own voice, expressing your own unique view of things, connecting with people in authentic ways.
It's about living a life that feels true to you, even if it means like going against the grain a little bit. But Deleuze and Guattari, they don't stop there, do they? They want to take us even deeper.
They do, because they bring up this whole concept of the double.
The double.
Yeah, it's a bit of a brain twister, I'll grant you. What they're suggesting is that even our sense of self is kind of split in two.
Okay.
There's the subject of enunciation, basically the I that's doing the thinking, the speaking. And then there's the subject of the statement, which is the I that's shaped by society, by all those dominant discourses, right?
Okay. So it's like we're always kind of negotiating between these two versions of ourselves, trying to figure out who we really are.
Yes, exactly. And you know what they say is one of the most powerful examples of this whole double thing? Love.
Ooh, love.
Love. They talk about love, passion. On the one hand, love can be this liberating force. It helps you break free from, the confines of yourself.
You feel seen.
Yes, you feel seen, you feel understood like never before. But it can also become this battleground for all these competing desires, right?
Totally.
The desire to kind of merge with another person.
Melt. Yeah.
Yes. But also at the same time, maintain your own sense of self.
It's that push and pull. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so real.
It is. Think about, the classic story of Tristan and Isolde. A love so intense, so all-consuming that it literally destroys them.
It's tragic.
Right. But isn't that the paradox of love? It can be liberating. It can be destructive. Joy, pain.
The highest highs, the lowest lows.
Oh, it is a high-stakes game, that's for sure. But Deleuze and Guattari, they're not done.
Oh, no.
They want to take us even beyond language, and they do this with this idea of the abstract machine.
Okay, full transparency. This is where I started to get a little lost.
Okay.
Abstract machines. It sounds very sci-fi.
It does, doesn't it? But remember, this isn't like some physical machine. It's more like a force, a process.
Okay.
That combines matter and function.
Okay.
To create these completely new realities. Maybe think of it like a piece of music. It's not just a random bunch of notes. It's a very deliberately structured arrangement of sounds, and it can evoke all these emotions. It can transport you to other places.
So a composer.
Yeah.
Like a really skilled composer.
Yes.
Is like an engineer.
Yes.
You're engineering these abstract machines.
They are.
To create something that has the power to change us.
Exactly. And these machines, they're not just limited to music. Think about mathematics.
Right.
Like these complex equations, they can map out the hidden structures of the universe.
Wow.
Revealing patterns and connections we wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
Like a secret code.
It is a secret code.
Yeah.
Even something as complex as the human brain, right, with its billions of neurons firing, that can be seen as an abstract machine.
Oh, wow.
Constantly processing information, generating new thoughts and ideas.
So are Deleuze and Guattari saying that we're not just passive recipients of these machines? That we can actually, learn to understand them? That we can tap into their power?
Absolutely. We can create our own meanings. We can change the world around us.
That is an incredibly empowering thought. It means we're not just cogs in some pre-programmed machine.
You are not.
We have the potential to be creators,
Yes.
to be innovators,
Yes.
to be revolutionary.
Revolutionaries, yes.
I love that. Well, this has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We went from the power of facial expressions
We did.
to the complexities of love to these abstract machines. It's a lot.
And that's the beauty of Deleuze and Guattari, right? They
Right.
just make you look at the world in a completely different way, question everything.
Embrace the unknown.
Absolutely.
I feel like they've given us a new set of lenses. Like now we can see these hidden forces that are shaping our reality,
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Deleuze, Guattari, and the wild world of semiotics, I don't know, I want to leave you with one final thought. Remember those abstract machines we were just talking about? What machines are driving your life? What forces are shaping your reality? And maybe, most importantly, where are your lines of flight?
That is an excellent question to ponder.
And that's it for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those lines of flight wide open. All right, strap yourselves in because today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into the world of Antonin Artaud and his, well, let's just say his pretty out there concept of the body without organs.
Yeah, out there is one way to put it.
I mean, come on, the body without organs. It's kind of wild, even for this show.
Definitely not your average everyday topic, that's for sure.
So to try to wrap our heads around all this, we're going straight to the source. Well, the source of this deep dive, at least. We're looking at excerpts from...
And it looks like these passages are actually from Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus.
Right, exactly.
Though they talk a lot about Artaud in that book, so it works out perfectly.
Yeah, Deleuze and Guattari were super into Artaud. But before we even try to understand the body without organs, maybe we should back up a bit. For anyone who might not be familiar with Artaud, where do we even start?
Well, Antonin Artaud, he was a French writer, poet, actor, theater director, you name it. He was active in the early to mid 20th century. And his work, it's intense, really gets under your skin.
Intense is putting it mildly. The guy literally declared war on organs.
Right, there's that famous quote from his later writings. 28th of November, 1947, he writes, "I declare war on the organs."
See, this is what I mean. War on organs. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, and I think it's important to emphasize here, he's not being literal.
Oh, good. Because for a second there, I thought we were headed down a very different path.
No organ removal necessary here, thankfully. It's more about, I think, how we can get so stuck in our ways of thinking about the body that we forget its full potential.
The body without organs, it's not about literally not having organs. It's like more a metaphor.
Exactly. It's a conceptual tool, a way to break down those rigid ways we're taught to see ourselves and the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. But then I read some of Artaud's descriptions, and he talks about these, what he calls damaged bodies. Hypochondriacs, paranoids, schizophrenics, even masochists. And to be honest, it's a little unnerving.
Yeah, I can see how those descriptions would be unsettling.
It kind of feels dark, you know?
It's definitely intense, no way around that. But I think it's crucial to remember Artaud isn't trying to glorify or romanticize these states of being.
No, of course not.
He's really interested in how these labels, how society perceives these individuals, it can limit our understanding of what it means to have a human experience.
So he's not like advocating for drug use or masochism as a way to achieve this body without organs state.
No, not at all. I think those kinds of interpretations miss the mark. And frankly, it's important to approach Artaud's ideas with a healthy dose of caution.
Agreed. So if the body without organs isn't about rejecting our bodies, and it's not about engaging in these potentially harmful practices, then what is it pushing back against? You keep mentioning limitations, but what are those limitations exactly, and where are they coming from?
Yeah, you've really hit on something there. It's not about saying the body is bad, but it's more about these limits we put on it, you know, what Artaud called the organism.
Okay, organism. So, like, is that the villain in this story? The body without organs versus the organism?
Kind of, yeah. But it's not like our literal organs, right? It's more about the way society tries to define what our bodies mean and how they work.
So all those expectations we're talking about, that's the organism.
Yeah, exactly. All those shoulds, like your body should do this, your body should look like that. Artaud called these layers of, I guess you could say, programming, strata.
Strata.
It's like these layers of meaning and conditioning that get piled on top of us. We're born into them, don't even get a choice, really.
So are you saying, like, we're all stuck in the matrix then? And these strata are the code?
Whoa, that's a really good analogy, actually. It's like we don't even see the code most of the time. Just think we're living life when really it's shaping everything about us.
Okay, so if the organism is like the overall system.
The big bad, as you said.
Right, exactly. Then what are these other strata?
Artaud talks about three main ones. There's the organism, which we've touched on, but then there's signifiance and subjectification.
Whoa, okay, those sound even more complicated.
Yeah. They're a mouthful, that's for sure. And they all kind of blur together, but that's kind of the point. It's like they work together to, keep us all in line.
So break those down for me. What is signifiance all about?
So signifiance, it's all about the meaning we give to things. Like, think about how we use language, our culture, all that stuff. It's how we make sense of the world, but it can also box us in.
Okay, and subjectification. That's the other one.
Right, so that one gets into how we become, well, subjects. Like how we form our identities based on all that meaning that's been imposed on us.
So it's like we're constantly being told who we are, what we should be, and we just kind of absorb it.
Exactly, and it gets so deep inside us we don't even question it most of the time.
We're trapped in our own little boxes.
And Artaud believed that all this pressure to conform to the organism, to be defined by signifiance and subjectification, it keeps us from really experiencing life.
So then how do we even begin to break free?
That's where things get really interesting. Artaud, he was very critical of psychoanalysis, that whole thing of digging into the past to understand the present. He thought it was too focused on interpreting,
So instead of trying to analyze our problems, he wanted us to do what?
He was all about action, about becoming...
Less talk, more action. I like it.
Exactly. He wanted us to engage directly with experience, to really feel things, let those sensations transform us.
And that's how we tap into the body without organs.
It's a way to bypass those restrictive strata, to experience reality more directly.
This reminds me of, you ever read Carlos Castaneda?
Oh yeah, definitely.
He talks about the tonal and the nagual.
And it sounds like Artaud's ideas are kind of similar, right? Because the tonal is all about structure and order, just like the organism.
Okay, so we've got the tonal. That makes sense. But what about the nagual? Where does that fit into all of this?
Right. So the nagual for Castaneda, it's like this realm of pure experience, pure energy. It's beyond language, beyond those fixed meanings we were talking about.
So it's kind of like stepping outside the matrix then.
You could say that it's where transformation happens, where you can really become something new.
And that's what Artaud was getting at with the body without organs.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that potential for change, for experiencing the world in a totally different way.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? Do we have to go on some crazy shamanic journey to find this body without organs?
Not necessarily. I mean, those kinds of experiences can be powerful, for sure. But for Artaud, I think it was more about finding those moments in everyday life.
Those moments where we can break free from the organism and all those layers of strata.
Yes, exactly. He talked about finding these lines of flight.
Lines of flight. Okay, now you're just messing with me, right?
I know it sounds kind of out there.
Just a bit.
But think of them like detours, those moments where you veer off the beaten path.
So those are the lines of flight.
Exactly. And when we follow them, it allows us to escape those restrictions, even if it's just for a little while.
So, like, what would be an example of a line of flight?
Well, it could be anything, really. It could be as simple as taking a different route to work, trying a new food you've never had before.
So basically anything that shakes things up a bit.
Exactly. It's about being open to new experiences, questioning your assumptions about how things should be.
Kind of like when you travel to a new place.
Yes, perfect example. You're more open, more aware of your senses.
And don't even get me started on the food.
Right. Exactly. And that's what Artaud wanted us to bring into our everyday lives.
That sense of adventure, of possibility.
Yes, because he believed that each of us, we have this potential within us, this body without organs just waiting to be unlocked.
It's like we're all artists in a way.
I love that. Yes. Yeah. We have the power to create new experiences, new ways of seeing the world.
To break free from those old, tired scripts.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a really powerful and liberating thought.
It is. And on that note, we're going to have to leave it there for today. But hey, maybe this is your cue to go out and find your own line of flight. Experiment a little, See what you discover.
Ever catch yourself, instantly judging someone just by their face?
Happens to all of us. It's human nature, right?
Totally. But what if I said there's this hidden system shaping those judgments, shaping how we even see faces in the first place?
That's what we're going to dig into today. This idea of faciality, which comes from Deleuze and Guattari, those kind of wild philosophers.
Yeah.
Their book, A Thousand Plateaus, prepare to see faces differently.
Deleuze and Guattari, yeah, they're known for being dense. So faciality, it's more than just our actual face.
Way more. Think of it like this. The face is a screen Deleuze and Guattari call it the white wall,
Okay, a white wall.
right? And onto this wall, we project meanings, judgments, all those snap decisions trustworthy, competent, attractive, just boom, from the face.
And we do it so fast, it's barely even a thought, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. Loaded with cultural baggage, biases we don't even realize. But there's another layer. The black hole, they call it.
Oh, sounds ominous. The black hole of the face.
The eyes. They're not just windows to the soul, they're how we categorize the world.
Whoa, hold on. I thought the eyes were, like, reflecting our inner self, not categorizing others.
Both. Think of a mother nursing her baby. Intense gaze, right? That's intimacy, but also power.
Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, her gaze teaches, guides, even controls the baby before they have words. That's faciality in action early on.
Deeply ingrained then. So it's like the white wall with society's meanings written on it and the black hole of the eyes, judging, deciding, and we're caught in the middle.
We are. But this screen idea, it connects to another thing they talk about. Deterritorialization. Okay, now that's a word. Break it down for us. What's that mean?
Basically, shifting territories. Our evolution, it wasn't just body stuff. It's like the face became this new territory for like emotions, social cues, all that.
So our early ancestors, they weren't thinking about facial expressions. They were just trying to survive, right?
Right. But as we got more social, the face, it took on a whole new importance.
Because humans are social creatures, we need that communication, and the face became the way to do it.
Exactly. Bodies driven by instinct, now they're shaped by what faces mean to each other.
Give us an example from the book, something concrete about this whole deterritorialization thing.
Sure. Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about lips and breasts.
Wait, what? Lips and breasts, that's a weird combo.
But it makes sense in their argument. It's about how, in humans, those things are about more than just biology.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see it, I guess. But how do lips and breasts fit in with all this?
It's about how, for humans, they're not just biological anymore. You know, think about it. Lipstick, the whole meaning of it. Or how breasts are sexualized in our culture. It's not just what they're for in the animal world.
So they've been, like, repurposed, deterritorialized, like you said, taken from their original meaning and given this whole other layer of, I don't know, social significance.
Exactly. Re-territorialized onto this new plane of meaning. And that system, it's not neutral. It's got power dynamics built right in, which affects how we experience, well, everything. Deleuze and Guattari, they don't beat around the bush. They say the faces of politics.
Ooh, the faces of politics. That's a heavy statement. So how does that actually play out, though?
It means deciding what's normal, what's acceptable, even beautiful about faces. That's a power move. Who gets to decide? Who gets pushed to the margins based on those standards?
It's not JSST about, like, superficial beauty, right? It's about our faces meeting these unspoken rules, so we're granted access, authority, or we're not.
Exactly. Haven't you ever felt like you had to present a certain face to the world, even if it wasn't real, how you actually felt?
All the time. It's like this pressure to seem okay even when you're not.
That's faciality at work. Those masks we wear, they're powerful. Deleuze and Guattari talk about the lover's face. It becomes this point of, like, total focus for desire, dependence.
Oh, yeah. When you're falling for someone, you can't stop looking at their face, every little expression.
Right. And we're craving their approval, dreading rejection, all happening on this canvas of the face.
Exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. But it's not just romance, right? You said Deleuze and Guattari talk about political leaders, too. Their faces have power.
Totally. Think about propaganda, or just like how important a politician's appearance still is today. A charismatic leader can control the crowd just with a look. Authority, trustworthiness, all projected onto their face and used to influence people.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it. Like, we're hardwired to respond to those cues, even if we don't know it. So can we escape it, this whole system?
The million-dollar question. And luckily, Deleuze and Guattari, they give us some options, even if they're not easy. They talk about lines of flight.
Lines of flight. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What are those?
Think of it like ways to break free from those preset meanings faciality puts on us. Not erasing the system, but finding those cracks where we can, I don't know, be real with our faces, express ourselves genuinely.
So not just accepting what's projected onto us, but making our own WN meaning.
Yes. Seeing the power of the system, but not letting it totally define us. Finding those cracks in the white wall, those little bits of light around the black hole, and making new paths.
I like that. Makes it less scary, more hopeful. But how do we actually find those lines of flight in our lives? What's a real-world example?
Well, Deleuze and Guattari use literature to explain it. They compare French and Anglo-American novels, which is interesting.
Okay, two very different vibes, but I'm here for a good book chat. How do those traditions connect to this?
They say French novels, they can get kind of stuck inside faciality. The characters, they're all about their social roles, appearances, expectations, trapped in that white wall, black hole system.
Playing by society's rules, even if those rules are unspoken. Got it. So Anglo-American novels, they break free. How?
Yeah, especially the classics. They're about breaking those rules, lighting out for the territory, as they say.
Lighting out. Makes me think of Huck Finn. Rejected all those norms, went on his own path, even though society was super judgmental.
There you go. That's a line of flight. Going beyond the familiar, beyond what's expected, to find new ways of being, inside and out.
So it's not about pretending faciality doesn't exist. It's about using it as a starting point to find new ways to express ourselves, reclaiming our faces, and in turn, reclaiming our agency in a world that's always trying to define us.
You got it. And while that might sound huge, like a lifelong project, the first step is just awareness. Recognizing this system, how it works.
Yeah.
That's powerful in itself.
Back again. So we've gone deep on this faciality thing with Deleuze and Guattari, but the big question is, what's the takeaway for us out here in the real world?
That's the key, right? We've seen how faces become these, like, billboards for social meaning, how power gets tied up and all that, and even how to push back a bit with those lines of flight.
Right. So it's not like we can just erase this whole system. Faces do have meaning. We can't pretend otherwise. But we can be smarter about it, more aware.
Absolutely. Deleuze and Guattari, they're not saying to live outside these systems entirely. Can't be done. It's about, like you said, awareness, questioning what we think is true about faces, and then reclaiming our NWN faces for real self-expression.
You keep saying that reclaiming our faces. What does that actually look like day to day? Are we talking like ditching makeup, deleting Instagram, or what?
Could be small, could be big.
Yeah.
It starts with noticing when you feel pressured to put on that face for the world, forcing a smile when you're down, trying to look confident when you're not.
Oh, yeah, that's relatable. Trying to fit into those boxes of what's acceptable, you know?
Exactly. And those boxes, they're full of biases, power dynamics, stuff we might not even realize is shaping our thinking. But once you see it, you can choose to be like, nope, not today.
So a line of flight could just be like letting yourself not smile for once. Or maybe it's trying out a new style that feels true to you, even if it's not what's considered cool right now.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's those little disruptions where you express yourself genuinely. Your face is yours, not some blank slate for other people to decide what it means.
I like that. Your face is yours. So powerful. We do have a choice in how we present ourselves, but we've also got to remember that our faces do have an impact on other people, whether we like it or not.
For sure. It's that balance, right? Acknowledging how powerful faciality is, but not letting it control us completely. Finding that sweet spot where you can work within these weird social systems, but with open eyes, being intentional, and maybe even a little subversive sometimes.
A little mischief never hurt. It makes it more fun, less scary. We can take the system that feels limiting and actually use it to be more creative, more ourselves.
Right. That's what I love about Deleuze and Guattari. They don't give you the answers, they make you think. Question everything and find your own lines of flight in this world that's obsessed with images.
Such a good point to end on. This has been wild, exploring the hidden meanings of faces, how they can be both good and bad, and how to take back some of that control. Any last words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Just this. Those expressions, your face, they're yours to figure out. Don't be afraid to mess around, break the rules a little, and most of all, be real.
Love that. Embrace the lines of flight. This has been an eye-opening deep dive into faciality. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep those minds curious, folks. Ever feel like you're stuck, like you're just going through the motions? Work, commute, eat, sleep, repeat.
The daily grind.
Exactly. And it can feel like we're living life on a track, you know? Just following these predetermined routes.
Right, like where's the spontaneity? Where's the freedom to choose your own path?
Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're tackling these questions with Jill Deleuze and Felix Guattari.
Now, those are two thinkers who definitely encourage you to get off that track.
They really are. But they can be a little, shall we say, challenging.
Yeah, a little bit mind-bending at times. But trust me, their ideas are worth the effort. They have this really unique way of looking at life as this journey across different kinds of lines.
Okay, lines. So not literal lines. Right. We're talking metaphorically here.
Exactly. It's more about, like, paths and patterns, the forces that shape our experiences.
I'm intrigued. So where do we even begin with Deleuze and Guattari? Where do these lines come into play?
Well, they actually talk about three main types of lines. And the first one, they call it rigid segmentarity.
Rigid segment. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating.
I know, it's a mouthful, guy.
Right.
But it's a really simple idea.
Yeah.
Think of it like the structured parts of your life. Your routines, your job, your daily commute, even like the same salad you always get for lunch.
Okay, so the things we do on autopilot.
Exactly. It's comfortable, familiar, but can also feel a bit like a rut, right?
Totally. It's like being stuck in that loop. But life isn't always rigid, is it? I mean, things change even within those structures.
Absolutely. And that's where their second type of line comes in. Supple segmentarity. Think of it like those tiny cracks in a seemingly solid surface. They might seem insignificant at first.
But they can grow.
Exactly. Over time, they can change the entire landscape. For Deleuze and Guattari, these supple segmentarities are where things get really interesting.
So it's like my go-to salad place. They change the menu and suddenly I have to try something new. That's a supple segmentarity.
Exactly. It's those subtle shifts, those little disruptions that might seem small, but they can throw you off your routine. They can even potentially lead to something new and exciting.
Okay, so that's two lines down, rigid and supple segmentarity. But I gotta ask, what about those bigger breaks, those moments where we completely jump tracks? Is that where the third line comes in?
Yeah, those big breaks, those are the exciting ones. Those are what Deleuze and Guattari call lines of flight. And it's not always like a gradual shift. Sometimes it's a conscious leap.
Okay, so less like a crack in the pavement and more like, what, a total detour.
Exactly. It's about recognizing, like, hey, this path isn't working for me anymore. I need to create my own way.
So how do we even begin to recognize these lines of flight? Are there any, like, signs we should be looking out for?
Well, Deleuze and Guattari use this image from a story, The Story of the Abyss and the Spyglass
Mhm.
by Pierrette Flutu. It's about these far-seers
Hmm.
who are like dedicated to observing the horizon. They spend their whole lives looking out for something new.
Okay, I'm picturing like these ancient mariners scanning the sea for...
Exactly. They're always watching, always waiting. But then one day, they just walk away. They abandon their posts and head inland into the unknown.
Wow, that's quite a shift. So are they saying we should all just abandon our posts and wander into the wilderness? I mean, that's a bit scary, isn't it?
It definitely takes courage, right?
Right.
But it's more about recognizing that those lines of flight are always there, even if they seem risky. There are those moments where you can choose to break free from what's expected and create something new.
I can see how that connects back to what we were saying about those subtle shifts, those supple segmentarities. It's like they can build up to those bigger breaks, those lines of flight.
Right. And, it's interesting. You mentioned F. Scott Fitzgerald earlier and his idea of the crack up. Deleuze and Guattari were really inspired by his work.
Yeah, Fitzgerald, he definitely knew something about those crack-ups, right? His life had some pretty intense highs and lows.
Absolutely. I mean, the pressures of fame, his wife Zelda's struggles, his own battles with addiction, these were all like those supple segmentarities, those cracks running through his life.
And eventually it all kind of culminated in his crack-up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you see, Deleuze and Guattari, they saw that crack up, not just as a breakdown, but as this moment of possibility, this point where everything converges and you're forced to confront everything.
It's like even in those moments that feel like falling apart, there's also this potential for something new to emerge.
Exactly. It's not about glorifying those difficult experiences, but about recognizing that they can be turning points. They can be opportunities for growth, for reinvention, for charting a new line of flight.
So it's really about how we choose to respond to those moments, those cracks, those ruptures, that determines what happens next. But Deleuze and Guattari, they weren't just talking about this on a personal level, right? These lines, they play out in society too.
Absolutely. They saw this as a kind of universal principle.
So like historical shifts, social movements, even like technological advancements.
Exactly. These could all be seen as collective lines of flight, moments where the existing structures are disrupted and something new emerges. Think about like the invention of the internet.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That totally changed everything. It's like we're all navigating these lines all the time, both in our own lives and as part of this larger collective experience. So what you're saying is that these moments of rupture, these crack-ups, they're kind of inevitable, both for us individually and for society as a whole. It's how we choose to respond to them that makes all the difference. But isn't there like a danger in all this? I mean, lines of flight, they sound amazing, breaking free, chasing your dreams. But what if it's the wrong flight?
It's not always easy, right?
Right?
Figuring out which way to go.
Exactly. What if you end up somewhere even more lost than you were before?
You've hit on a really important point. It's not about like blindly chasing every rupture, every crack in the pavement.
So how do you know? How do you tell the difference between like a true line of flight and just running in circles?
That's where things get really interesting. Because there's not like a map, you know? There's no guidebook for this kind of exploration.
It's more about like intuition.
In a way, yeah. Remember, Deleuze and Guattari, they saw this whole process as fluid, always changing.
Yeah.
It's about like paying attention to those subtle shifts, those moments where you feel a little like restless, a little off balance, and then being willing to experiment,
Yeah.
To try something new without being too attached to the outcome.
So less about finding the right line and more about like staying open to the journey wherever it takes you.
Exactly. It's about being willing to adjust your course, to change direction, to embrace the unknown.
It's like instead of fearing those moments when life throws us a curveball, we can actually start to see them as opportunities for growth, for transformation, for discovering something new about ourselves, about the world.
Exactly. Like those farseers we were talking about earlier. They could have stayed at their posts, safe and predictable.
But they chose to venture into the unknown, and who knows what they found there.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. That's what Deleuze and Guattari want us to see, that those lines of flight, they're always there. It's up to us to have the courage to follow them and see where they lead.
Embrace the cracks. That's what I'm taking from this. Embrace the unexpected detours, the unplanned adventures. And who knows, maybe that's where we'll find our own lines of flight. So to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep embracing those cracks. Until next time.
Okay, so power dynamics. We hear that term thrown around a lot these days, but what does it actually mean?
Well, most people think about presidents and CEOs when they hear power dynamics.
Oh, right, like those big, obvious structures we all know about.
Exactly. But to really get it, we got to go smaller, more like everyday life. That's what we're talking about with micropolitics.
Micropolitics. So is this deep dive like zooming in on a tiny world of power struggles, like under a microscope?
Kind of. We're going deep into an excerpt from Deleuze and Guattari's Thousand Plateaus. They use this idea of segmentarity to show how power operates in all these subtle ways.
Okay, segmentarity. Sounds kind of complex.
It's just lines. Think of it like that. Some lines are rigid, fixed, right? Like those are your laws, institutions, the official rules think, your organizational chart at work. Then you've got these other lines, more like supple, flexible. Those are the unspoken rules, the desires, the informal connections, all that stuff that shapes how we act but isn't written down anywhere.
Okay, so at work, there's the official hierarchy. That's a rigid line. But then there's who's actually friends with the boss, who the boss listens to, all that unspoken stuff that's supple. Right.
You got it. And what's wild is how those lines are always playing off each other. One example they give is like the barbarians on the edge of the Roman Empire.
Oh, interesting.
So those folks, they were stuck between two worlds, right? The rigid structure of Rome versus their more fluid, nomadic life.
Talk about tension.
Big time. And that tension, that's where these things they call lines of flight come in, like bursts of energy, escapes, rebellion.
So the barbarians, they had to decide, stick with Rome's rules or break free.
Exactly. And those decisions, those are lines of flight in action. But here's the thing.
What's that?
Those lines of flight, they can be creative, but they can also be just as destructive. Like they talk about how fascism, that's like a suicidal state where the desire to destroy everything becomes the line of flight.
Whoa, okay. So it's not always a good thing, this whole line of flight business.
Right. It's more complex than just good or bad. They're saying we need to understand how these lines work, how they mess with our desires, to really grasp how power is working on us.
Okay, I'm getting that we need to pay attention to these lines, but how do they actually play out in our lives? Give me an example.
All right, well, they break down segmentarity into different types.
Different type.
Yeah. They say it can be binary, circular, or linear. Each one has its own way of shaping those power dynamics. Let's start with binarily. Think of all those either-or categories we see everywhere.
Easy, like good versus evil, Democrat versus Republican.
Exactly. And while those seem straightforward, Deleuze and Guattari say those categories work differently depending on whether you're talking about a simple society or our modern world.
Interesting. How so?
Well, think about those barbarians again. They were a distinct group from the Romans, right? A clear binary there. But within their own tribes, they had their own power struggles, alliances, rivalries. It wasn't so simple as just us versus them.
So even their idea of barbarian was more complex than it seemed from the outside.
Totally. But in our modern world, Deleuze and Guattari say those simple binaries become even more dominant. It's like we're always being presented with two options, two sides, pick one.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's everywhere. Two political parties, two sides to every story.
Exactly. And all that nuance, all those supple lines, they get kind of erased, leaving only those rigid, inflexible categories.
And then we wonder why everyone's always fighting. Like,
Yeah.
come on, there's got to be more than two sides to everything.
Right. But, okay, let's move on to the next type of segmentarity, the circular one. Imagine concentric circles, like ripples in a pond.
Okay, I can see it. But how does a ripple equal power?
So picture a bunch of villages, each with their own way of doing things, their own leaders, right? Loosely connected by, like, trade or tradition.
Okay, so each village is its own circle with its own center of power, but they're not all controlled by one single leader.
Exactly. But as societies become more centralized, those circles become more uniform, revolving around one big, powerful center.
And that central power could be what? Like, give me an example.
It could be the government or a huge corporation or even a powerful idea that everyone buys into. The point is, it tries to bring all those other circles under its control.
So it's like those individual villages slowly losing their independence as they get pulled closer to this dominant force.
Exactly. Think about how big corporations influence what laws get passed, or how social media shapes what people think about, well, everything.
It's like they're drawing everyone into their orbit.
Exactly. And, it's kind of natural for people to want that sense of order and stability that a strong center can provide.
I get that. Everyone wants to feel safe and like they belong. So what's the problem?
The problem is when that desire for order becomes about control, when we start policing ourselves and each other, often without even realizing it.
Ooh, that's deep. It's like we become complicit in our own limitations.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third kind of segmentarity, linear.
Linear. Okay, lay it on me.
This one's about trajectories. Think about the path your life is supposed to take. You're born into a family, go to school, get a job, all that.
Like following a set of instructions.
I'll tell you.
Or coloring inside the lines.
Yes. And just like the other types, linear segmentarity plays out differently depending on the society. Think about nomadic cultures. They were always on the move, adapting to the environment, forging their own paths.
They were drawing their own map as they went.
Mhm.
We're usually handed one that's already made.
And that pre-made map, that rigid linearity, it often reinforces existing power structures. Think about how our schools prepare us for certain jobs, or how some people have way more choices than others, just based on where they were born.
Right, like your options are already limited from the start. It feels so confining.
Which makes me think about those lines of flight again. Are those the key to breaking free from all these rigid lines? Whether they're binary, circular, or linear? Well, they can be a way out, but Deleuze and Guattari, they're like warning us, right? Don't just blindly follow any line of flight you see.
Exactly. It's not that simple. You can escape one trap and walk straight into another.
Okay, so breaking free isn't enough. What else do we need to think about?
They talk about 4 main dangers to watch out for.
4 dangers. Okay, hit me. First one, and this might seem obvious, is fear. Fear keeps us clinging to the familiar, even if it's bad for us.
Oh, totally. Like staying in a job you hate just because it's scary to quit.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They also say too much clarity can be a problem.
Wait, too much clarity. How's that even possible?
It's like if you become obsessed with analyzing every little power dynamic, you see enemies everywhere.
Oh, I get it. Like paranoia almost.
Yeah.
You're so busy fighting every little battle, you lose sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly. And those in power, they love that. Keeps us distracted.
Wow, it's like a total mind game.
Right. So we've got fear, clarity, and then there's power itself.
Okay, how's power a danger?
Well, it's seductive, and it happens at all levels, not just the big stuff. They talk about how easy it is to abuse even a little bit of power.
Yeah, it's that whole power corrupts thing.
Yeah.
But it's not just presidents and CEOs. It's happening everywhere.
All the time. And it's sneaky because it pretends to be something else. Like, they talk about how some leaders act helpless, like they're not even in control.
But they're actually in control.
Totally. They're just playing a different game.
Why would someone do that, though?
Because it makes people give up. If the leader's powerless, why even try to change things?
Ugh, that's so manipulative. Okay, so we've got fear, clarity, power. What's the last one?
The big one. The danger of the line of flight itself. Even if you break free, there's no guarantee you'll find something better on the other side.
You're saying those lines of flight, they can lead to bad places.
Oh, yeah. They can lead to, like, nihilism, emptiness, that allure of chaos. It's exciting at first, but it can be really destructive.
Like those revolutions that end up worse than what they replaced.
Exactly. Which brings us back to fascism. Remember how we said it was a kind of suicide state?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Deleuze and Guattari, they say fascism, it works by taking those desires for escape, those lines of flight, and twisting them.
So instead of leading to freedom, they lead to, what, destruction?
Right. It's like that desire for freedom gets warped into a desire for annihilation.
Okay, this is heavy stuff. So if these lines of flight are so unpredictable, how do we navigate them? How do we not get, like, sucked into the bad ones?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. It's more about being aware, thinking critically, questioning everything.
So paying attention to where those lines of flight are taking us and deciding if we actually want to go there.
You got it.
Wow. This has been, like, seriously eye-opening. I'm seeing these dynamics everywhere now.
That's Deleuze and Guattari for you.
So for everyone listening, we want you to look at your own life. Where are those rigid and supple lines? Where have you seen those lines of flight? And where are your own desires taking you?
Keep questioning. And most importantly, keep those lines of flight open.
This has been a deep dive indeed. Until next time, keep exploring those spaces where power and possibility collide.
All right, buckle up, everyone, because we're about to dive into some seriously uncharted territory today.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about this wild idea
Yeah.
of becoming animal.
And hold on to your hats, folks.
Yeah.
Because this isn't your grandma's werewolf story. We're going way beyond those classic transformations.
Way deeper than just like howling at the moon, right?
Exactly.
You've brought some excerpts from this philosophy text, and let me tell you, it grapples with how we see ourselves, us humans alongside animals, in ways I never even imagined.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew. Like, where do we actually fit into the bigger picture?
Totally. And what's so cool is that it pulls from all over the place. Mythology, literature, we're talking Kafka, Borges, even music. Debussy makes an appearance.
Yeah.
Clearly, this isn't just some dry biology lesson.
Definitely not.
But okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, back up for a second. What does this whole becoming animal thing even mean?
It's like hitting the reset button on how we usually think about animals. We often try to organize them, put them in these neat little boxes, like they're all on this hierarchy, striving to be more human.
Right, like humans are at the top of the evolutionary ladder.
Exactly. This text says forget about that. That's what we call series thinking. And it's totally missing the point. And it's not enough to just compare physical features, categorize them based on their anatomy, structure, thinking. It's about understanding this process, this flow, this becoming.
Okay, so less about labeling and more about understanding the journey. I'm with you so far. But can you give me an example? How does this becoming thing actually work?
Okay, so instead of fixating on the end product, that fixed form, what if we focus on the in-between, those blurry, messy stages where change is actually happening?
So like with a butterfly, we're so busy admiring the wings, we forget about the whole metamorphosis part.
Precisely. The text calls this the block of becoming, those moments of radical transformation where something totally new emerges, and that's where your werewolves and vampires come in.
See, I knew there was a reason I liked those examples.
Right, and it's not about literally sprouting fangs or fur.
Thank goodness for that, though. Halloween is just around the corner.
It's about using those images to explore how this idea of transformation can change how we see ourselves, how we fit into our own packs, our communities, even our most basic instincts.
Hold on, we're not talking about literal packs of wolves here, right? The text seems to use that term a bit differently.
You're catching on. The text says that the pack is like the foundation of what it means to be an animal.
Yeah.
But it's not just families or social structures. It's understanding that we're all, humans included, part of this web of relationships, this energy that influences how we act and experience the world.
It's like that thing where you see a flock of birds and they're all moving in sync, right?
Yeah.
Like they're acting as one unit, even though each bird is making its own decisions.
A hive mind.
Yes, a hive mind. That's a great way to put it.
That's a fantastic image. And these connections, these flows of energy between individuals, they're messy. The text calls them contagion, epidemics, unnatural participations, shaking up our nice, neat categories.
Unnatural participations. Okay, now you have to tell me more about that, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm already picturing those nature documentaries, when you see completely different species working together.
Yes, it's like a bee pollinating a flower. Two totally different forms of life coming together in this unexpected dance. Not from the same pack in the traditional sense, but completely intertwined, completely dependent on each other.
That's amazing. Okay, you're blowing my mind right now. This whole thing has me looking at the natural world in a totally different way. But the text also mentions these figures, these anomalous individuals within the pack. So who are these rogue agents? Give me the inside scoop.
The anomalous. They're the outliers, the rebels. Imagine a lone wolf separated from the pack. It's not held back by the same rules anymore. It has to figure things out on its own, which can lead to unpredictable, sometimes even dangerous situations.
Right, so the lone wolf becomes this mythical figure, right? And we kind of do that with humans too, right?
Exactly. Think about Captain Ahab and his relentless pursuit of Moby Dick.
Okay, Ahab obsessed with a whale. I get the lone wolf thing, but there are whales everywhere.
But that's just it. Moby Dick isn't just any whale. He's something bigger, something that breaks the mold.
So more than just a regular whale, then?
Way more. He's the untamable, the wild ocean itself.
Wow. So Ahab's not after just a trophy. He's after that anomalous energy.
Exactly. It's not about the hunt. It's about tapping into a force beyond normal, that edge where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm hooked. But how do we even start to understand this philosophically?
Well, that's where Spinoza comes in. He gives us this framework for seeing how becoming animal is more than just an idea. It's about how reality actually works.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity now.
Have you ever thought about how we define things, how we separate them out in our minds?
By naming them, putting them in categories, isn't that just how we make sense of the world?
Exactly. But Spinoza says, what if we shift our focus? Instead of seeing individual things as separate and static, we see them as part of this interconnected web of energy.
So less about the individual pieces and more about how they all fit together, then.
You got it. He calls this web substance. And it's less about individual forms and more about the flows of energy that connect everything.
So it's not about what things are, but about how they interact. And how does this connect back to us, to our own becomings?
Well, on this web of substance, each thing, each moment, has its own unique essence. Spinoza calls it haecidi. Like, think about a summer evening.
Pleasant.
It has a certain feel, a certain rhythm, even though it's made up of things that are constantly changing.
So like how a thunderstorm feels different from a calm, starry night.
Exactly. Each moment has its own haecidi, its own signature. And here's the cool part. Those becomings, those transformations, they're not separate from haecidi. They're actually how we express it.
Hold on. So becoming isn't about trying to be something else permanently. It's about tapping into those flows and expressing our unique place in the world.
You got it. And it's not just us. The text even uses the example of how we experience the weather, something we usually see as separate from us,
Right. Like we're separate from nature.
to help explain this concept.
Okay, so this substance idea starts to break down those barriers we put up between ourselves and the world, even between us and other animals.
It's a totally different way of seeing, and it opens up these paths, these lines of flight, where we can break free from limitations and experience the world in a whole new way.
Okay, we've got to talk about these lines of flight. Where do they lead?
The text describes them as paths of transformation, moments where we break free from our routines, those ideas about who we are, those sparks of something new.
Like when you step outside your comfort zone and surprise yourself. Or you're so into something music, art, you lose track of time and feel connected to something bigger.
Exactly. Think about artists and musicians who break the mold, create something brand new. The text talks about Schumann and Debussy,
Oh, right, from before.
musicians who explored becoming's child, becoming's woman, even becoming's molecular in their music.
Wow. So just by making music, they were tapping into these different ways of experiencing the world.
And we all have that potential. Those lines of flight are open to everyone, but there's a catch,
A catch. You're not going to leave me hanging, are you?
maybe just a little. Because while these lines of flight can lead to incredible change, there's risk involved. It can be exhilarating, but also disorienting, even dangerous if we're not careful.
Okay, you can't just say disorienting and dangerous and leave me hanging. What kind of risk? What could go wrong on these lines of flight?
Think of it like a tightrope walker. They're pushing boundaries, right? Defying gravity, creating something incredible. But it takes focus, balance. You slip up for a second,
Yeah, not good.
things can go bad quickly.
So with these lines of flight, these becomings, You need some self-awareness, a way to stay grounded even when you're exploring the unknown.
Exactly. The text uses drug addiction as an example.
Mm,
Some people might see it as a way to reach different states of consciousness, a line of flight,
right.
but it can easily become a way to just check out of reality.
So instead of transformation, it's a dead end, running away from our Hexidi instead of expressing it.
Exactly. And that's the key takeaway, isn't it? It's not about becoming someone or something else. It's about using those flows, those becomings, to better understand who we already are.
So how do we find that balance, explore those edges, those lines of flight, without getting lost?
Well, the text reminds us that the pack idea is not just external. We have a pack within us, too.
Wait, like inside us?
Our different desires, impulses, even the parts we try to ignore.
So becoming aware of our own, inner landscape is the first step.
Exactly. Once you're self-aware, you can start to see those lines of flight that fit your Hexidi, your own opportunities.
Like little Hans wanting to become horse, not literally transforming, but shifting his experience. Was he on to something? Exploring his own internal pack.
Fascinating way to look at it. He was trying to break free from those human and animal boxes to find a different way to be. And that's something we can all learn from, right?
So why should people listening care about this whole becoming animal thing? What's the takeaway?
It pushes us to look beyond the labels, the categories we use to define ourselves. It's a whole new way to experience life, less about reaching some fixed state, more about embracing the constant change, that energy connecting us all.
Finding a new language, one that speaks in feelings, movements, connections, rediscovering that wildness we all have in us.
In a world that often feels so disconnected, finding ways to tap into that shared energy, it can be incredibly powerful.
This has been a journey. Werewolves, flocks of birds, Spinoza, Debussy, all to understand becoming animal.
Quite the exploration. And hopefully listeners will leave thinking about their own becomings, those little shifts and changes that shape us in ways we might not even realize.
So next time you're drawn to an animal, don't just ask, what's my spirit animal? Ask, what about this animal speaks to me? What can I learn? Where might it be leading me?
You might just discover a deeper understanding of yourself and your place in this wild world.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep becoming. All right, diving in today with something, well, maybe a little different. We're tackling the refrain. But before you think we're just gonna, analyze song lyrics all day, I promise this gets way more interesting.
It really does.
We're diving into Of the Refrain, a chapter from A Thousand Plateaus by Deleuze and Guattari.
Oh, excellent choice.
Yeah, it's definitely one for the philosophy fans out there.
For sure. But instead of dusty old lectures, they're using bird songs, art, even the cosmos to explore this idea of the refrain.
It's wild. So our mission today is to give you those key insights, the Cliff's Notes version.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting about their approach is how they take something we think we understand, like that familiar chorus of a song, and blow it wide open.
Wow.
We're talking about how we create order from chaos on a really fundamental level.
Okay, so less about top 40 hits, more about the fundamentals of human experience. I'm intrigued. Walk me through it.
Okay, so picture this. A child in the dark, a little scared, starts humming to themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Just a simple act, right? But that, my friend, is a refrain in its purest form. They are carving out a space of comfort, of known, in the middle of the unknown.
It's like a sonic security blanket.
Exactly. And Deleuze and Guattari take it even further. They say it's how we establish our place in the world, how we mark our territory. They even use this really cool visual Paul Klee's artwork twittering machine. It's this contraption with these little birds on it just buzzing with nervous energy.
I've seen that one. It's simple, but it sticks with you. Kind of like a good refrain, actually.
Exactly. Klee called the heart of it the gray point, pure chaos. But from that point, the twittering, that repetition, it's like the birds are creating these little pockets of order, just like that kid in the dark.
So we're talking about more than just comfort here. This is about marking territory, right? And the book uses some pretty wild examples from the animal kingdom to get this across.
Oh, absolutely. Take birdsong, for instance. When a bird sings, it's not just for the joy of it, right? They're sending a message.
Right.
Like, this is my space, back off.
Murr.
And they even found that if a rival bird tries to encroach, the bird who claimed the territory, they'll sing louder, and often the intruder backs down. Talk about using your voice, right?
It's like an auditory keep-out sign.
Yeah.
But it's not just about individual birds either, right? They were talking about how different species, they use this in totally unique ways.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, they point out how brightly colored birds tend to be more territorial, you know?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their plumage, it becomes a visual refrain in a way. It's like they're broadcasting their ownership of a space. And you compare that to, say, all white birds, they're generally more social. They don't seem to need those strong territorial markers.
Wow. It's amazing how much meaning we can pack into something as simple as a sound or a color, you know?
Yeah.
It makes you realize we do the same thing, maybe without even thinking about it.
All the time.
Like when you blast your favorite music to claim some space or have that like personalized ringtone that's yours, it's a way of saying, this is ME and this is my zone. Okay, so refrains are how we stake our claim in the world. But I get the feeling Deleuze and Guattari don't stop there.
You're spot on. They don't just stop at claiming territory. Things get even more interesting when Deleuze and Guattari start talking about refrains becoming, well, expressive, even artistic. And they use this bird, the brown stage maker, to make their point.
Okay, the name alone has me hooked. What does this bird do? Like build tiny stages?
Pretty much. They decorate their territory with leaves, but, and here's the cool part, not just anyway, these birds, they meticulously turn the leaves over to show the lighter underside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, creating these little installations, almost like, you know, a found object art piece.
So it's not just this is my space, it's, hey, check out my decorating skills.
Exactly. And this ties into what Deleuze and Guattari call art brut, that raw, instinctual drive to create, that urge we all have to shape our surroundings, you know, to develop a style. It's not just about marking territory anymore. It's expressing something deeper.
Wow. So even a bird rearranging leaves is engaging in this profound process of expression through refrains. Makes you think about all the choices WE make, our clothes, music, how we decorate our homes. It's like we're all artists, just crafting our own personal refrains, maybe saying more than we even realize.
Absolutely. And to really drive home how complex these expressions can get, Deleuze and Guattari, they bring up the stickleback fish.
Okay, I remember reading about this. I was picturing like some graceful underwater ballet.
Well, hold that image for a sec. It's more of a zigzag dance. But here's the fascinating thing. The zig, that's actually an expression of aggression, while the zag, that's all about guiding the female to the nest.
Wait, so it's a whole relationship drama playing out in zigzags?
Precisely. You have these seemingly simple movements expressing this really complex interplay of instincts and desires. And it gets even more nuanced. The angle of the zig, the speed of the zag.
Okay. I can tell you're deep in the zigzag weeds here, but I think our listener gets the idea. There's a lot more to these actions than meets the eye.
Right, of course. The takeaway is that even something as simple as a repetitive movement can be brimming with meaning, expressing things we might not even be consciously aware of. Makes you wonder, what are the stickleback dances we perform in our own WN lives, our daily routines, our style choices? What are those really saying about us?
That's a great question. So we've gone from birds singing to claim their space to this idea that they're expressing something deeper, something almost artistic. But Deleuze and Guattari, well, they don't stop there, do they? They take this whole refrain idea in an even wilder direction. All right, so we've seen how refrains can be about claiming your space and even, like you were saying, expressing something deeper, almost artistic. But then Deleuze and Guattari, they kind of blew my mind with this idea of deterritorialization.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, right?
It is.
But it's a really powerful idea once you unpack it a bit. It's like this, imagine a territory. That space, a refrain is marked out, right? Deterritorialization is what happens when the refrain itself, it starts to break down those boundaries and something totally new emerges.
Okay, I think I need an example because that sounds almost like a contradiction.
Okay, let's go back to those Australian grass finches.
Okay.
Remember how the male uses that grass stem?
Right.
Initially, it's all about building that nest. You know, very practical, very much about defining his territory.
Well, claiming his space, showing off those nest building skills.
Exactly. But then, over time, the stem, it becomes less about the actual building and more about the song and dance of courtship. It's still a refrain, but the meaning has shifted.
So it's like that stem goes from being, hey, check out my house, to check out this cool stem, aren't I impressive?
Basically.
And what Deleuze and Guattari point out is that in some species, the male barely even uses the stem anymore. It's almost purely symbolic at that point. But here's the thing.
Okay.
It's not so much a symbol as it is like a bridge to something new. They call it a converter.
A converter, huh? You're really throwing out the big words today, making me wish I'd paid more attention in philosophy class.
Sorry. What they mean is that grass stem refrain, it's not just about that individual bird and his little territory anymore. It's become something that creates a connection. It's building this whole new dynamic around courtship and social interaction. So something that once meant, this is mine, is now helping to build a connection, a kind of us.
That is wild. It makes me think about how in our own lives, there are things that start with one meaning, and then over time, they take on a whole new significance. Like an old family heirloom. Maybe it was just an object at first, but now it represents all these memories. Or even a childhood hobby that, I don't know, turned into a lifelong passion.
Yeah.
Have you experienced something like that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I think makes Deleuze and Guattari so exciting to read. They don't just leave us with these abstract ideas, they want us to see how the stuff plays out in our everyday lives. But here's a real kicker. They don't stop with birds and grass stems, oh no. They take this whole refrain idea to, like, the biggest stage imaginable.
Wait, don't tell me. The cosmos. We started with humming in the dark, and now we're going full-on intergalactic. You got it.
Yeah.
They actually say that the entire cosmos is a refrain. They write, everything that has been taken for a labyrinth is in fact a refrain. Those patterns of repetition, of creation and dissolution, connection and change, they're happening on a cosmic scale.
Okay, yeah, my mind is officially blown. But if the cosmos is a refrain, I mean, where does that leave us down here on Earth listening to our favorite tunes?
And that's where it gets really interesting. They argue that sound, probably more than any other art form, has this incredible power to, here's that word again, deterritorialize us.
There it is. I was wondering when it would be back.
Laughs. Right, sorry. But think about it. Music just has this power to shake things up, you know? It breaks us out of our routines, our limited ways of thinking, and suddenly we're open to something so much bigger. That feeling you get when a song totally transports you, where you just lose yourself in the music. That's deterritorialization in action.
Man, I can think of so many songs that do that for me. Is that like the cosmic refrain at work?
It very well could be. You see, Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about how painters, they build outwards from the body, but musicians, they're tapping into something that already exists. It's like they're channeling that cosmic flow through their instruments.
Wow. So whether we're humming to ourselves in the dark or getting lost in a song, we're all part of this bigger cosmic refrain. That's a pretty amazing thought to end on.
It really is.
This deep dive has been a trip. From bird songs to the cosmos, all through the lens of this one powerful concept. It really makes you stop and think about where we find those refrains in our own lives. The music that moves us, the routines that ground us, even those objects we hold on to that have special meaning for us. And what would it mean to become more aware of those refrains? Would it change how we navigate the world, how we connect with each other? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of refrains. Until next time.
All right, strap in. Because today, we are diving into some seriously thought-provoking stuff.
We are.
We're tackling excerpts from a treatise on nomadology, the war machine.
Wow.
And let me tell you, this is not your typical war story.
No, it's not. It's very dense. But it's very, very rewarding as well.
So we're going beyond battlefields and generals and all that to explore this idea of the war machine as a concept. And I got to be honest, when I first saw this title, it's like,
it's a bit intimidating, isn't it?
The war machine, I thought, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
But luckily we have you here to help us unpack this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the core concept here is that the war machine isn't just about armies or weapons or, physical conflict. It's a much broader concept. It's a way of being. It's a force. It's something that exists outside the traditional structures of the state.
Okay, so outside the state. That's interesting.
Yes.
I mean, that right there is a whole other way to think about it. So what's the difference then? If it's not the state doing war, what are we even talking about?
Yeah, I mean, usually we think of war as something that states do.
Right, they declare it.
Yeah, they declare it, they raise armies, they go, they fight over territory.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. This text argues that the war machine is something much older and wilder, something that the state tries to harness, but it can't ever quite control it.
So it's like this other thing out there.
Yeah.
And the state's like, man, I wish I had my hands on that.
Yes.
I wish I could control it. But it's from somewhere else, this power.
Yes, absolutely.
So where does it come from then?
Yeah.
If the state's not making it?
Well, that's a good question.
This is where it gets kind of a little out there.
All right.
It says here it comes from mythology,
Yeah.
which is not where I thought we were going.
Well, I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. The
Yeah.
concept is so old and so primal in a way.
Okay.
It suggests it's something very deeply rooted in the human experience.
Okay.
The text points to the work of this scholar, Georges de Mizil,
Okay.
who studied ancient mythology
Okay.
and found these two figures that are constantly recurring that seem to represent the state's power.
Okay, so like who are these figures?
The magician king
Okay.
and the jurist priest.
Okay, so like Gandalf and a stern librarian.
Yeah, basically, you've got the right idea.
Okay.
So the magician king, it's this figure of charisma and divine right, raw power, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the jurist priest, who's all about law, order. He's the administrator.
Okay.
They're two sides of the same coin, though. They're both firmly within the structure of the state.
Right. Two sides, same coin.
Exactly.
And the war machine doesn't fit on that coin.
It doesn't fit in that neat little power structure at all.
So where does it go?
It's the outsider.
Okay.
It's the disruptive force.
Okay.
The text uses this example of the god Indra from Hindu mythology.
Okay.
So incredibly powerful, but totally unpredictable.
Okay.
A god of storms and war and breaking free from constraints. He doesn't rule in the same way that, your magician king or jurist priest does. He disrupts.
Just shakes things up.
Yeah. Creates and destroys. He's a very chaotic force.
So are we missing something then if we just think about it in terms of like, here comes the army and tanks and,
Yeah.
treaties?
I think we miss a huge part of the story.
Yeah.
And I think what's so fascinating here is that by understanding this concept of the war machine, we can start to see how this nomadic external force has shaped history in ways that we might not even have considered before.
Okay.
Because it's not just about battles.
Right.
It's about how we understand power itself.
Okay.
Where it comes from,
Yeah.
how it operates, all of that.
So we've got this wild card, this war machine, doing its own thing. But like, what does that even look like in practice?
Right.
How do we even begin to get our heads around that?
Well, the text uses this really interesting analogy
Okay.
of chess versus Go.
Okay.
So you've got the chessboard, this rigid grid,
Okay.
with pieces that have very clearly defined ways they can move.
Right. Very specific.
That's your state.
Okay.
It's all about control, strategy within this fixed system.
Yeah. Every move is like calculated.
Yes,
It's all about the rules.
exactly.
And then there's Go.
Yeah. So if chess is the state, Go is very much the war machine.
Okay.
It's an open board,
Okay.
pieces interacting in a much more fluid,
Okay.
almost limitless way.
So it's almost like the difference between planning a road trip where you've got your map and you've highlighted the route
Yes.
versus just hopping in the car and saying, let's see where the road takes us.
Exactly. And that actually leads very well into this idea of smooth space,
Okay.
which the source talks about a lot.
Yeah, smooth space. That one, I'll be honest, I had to read that a couple times.
Yeah.
To try to figure out like what are we talking about here?
It's a key concept here.
Okay.
So think of it this way.
Okay.
The state is all about striating space,
Okay.
carving it up,
Okay.
putting up borders, making every inch useful for its own purposes.
Okay, so like fences, property lines, like literal borders between countries.
All of that, exactly.
Okay.
But the war machine operates in smooth space. It's a space that is open and flowing and constantly in flux.
Like those nomads we were talking about.
Exactly.
They're not trying to like build an empire on a map. They're moving with the flow of the resources, with the seasons, with whatever.
Precisely. And what's so revolutionary about this idea is that it suggests a completely different relationship to power. The war machine isn't about dominating a territory in the same way that the state does. It's about movement, adaptation, creation within this constantly shifting landscape.
Which makes you wonder then, so if the war machine, this nomadic way of being, predates the state, how did the state become the main thing?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, did it wrangle the war machine? Did it get it under control somehow?
It's a question that has fascinated anthropologists and historians for centuries.
Yeah.
And the text actually brings up this really fascinating, if controversial, theory from this anthropologist, Pierre Clastres.
Right, lay it on me.
So Clastres argued that rather than being on some kind of inevitable march towards statehood, a lot of early societies were actively trying to prevent states from forming.
So they saw a state as like a bad thing.
From their perspective, yes. They
Okay.
saw it as this threat to their freedom, to their social structure, to their entire way of life.
So war for them was a way to, like, keep the state away.
Exactly. It was a
Oh,
way to prevent this concentration of power, this accumulation of resources, all the things that allow states to form and thrive.
man, that's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But it does seem like every time we dig a little deeper in history, we're finding lost empires and kingdoms and things. It seems like states have been around forever.
That's true.
Yeah.
And, Cluster's theory definitely has its limitations. But those ancient empires that you mentioned, I think they actually support this idea of the war machine's influence in a way.
How so?
Because states, even ancient ones, are always defined by what they are, but also by what they are not.
Okay.
They have an inside and an outside.
Oh.
The existence of the state kind of depends on making a clear distinction between the two.
So even when it seems like the state is this dominant force, it's always interacting with this, like, nomadic outside,
Exactly.
this war machine energy.
Precisely. And we see that dynamic even today playing out in these really complex ways.
All right, so we've got these ancient forces, the state, the war machine, kind of always at play. But then this text, it's like, hold on a minute. It says the war machine isn't just about how we fight. It's about how we think.
Yeah, it really is.
What does that even mean?
It's one of the most interesting parts of this whole concept, I think. The text argues that there's this link between the war machine and a different way of approaching knowledge, like a different kind of science almost.
Okay, so like
It calls it nomad science.
nomad science.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
are we inventing new physics here? What's going on?
Not quite. But think about it this way. The state, with its institutions, with its universities, with all these really rigid structures, it produces a very specific kind of knowledge,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Very structured, very organized, very much based on established rules and methods.
Follow the formula.
Exactly.
Here's the textbook.
Yeah, you're not really supposed to color outside the lines too much.
Right.
But the war machine, with its fluidity, with its adaptability, it suggests this totally different approach. It's about direct experience, intuition. It's about making connections across disciplines.
So less about memorizing the textbook, more about writing your own textbook
Exactly.
based on what you're finding out there.
Exactly.
So give me an example. Like who would be, I don't know, like in the ancient world, who's our poster child for nomad science?
The text actually uses the example of Archimedes,
Okay.
right? I mean, we all know him. Brilliant inventor, the guy who discovered the principle of buoyancy.
Didn't he figure that out in the bathtub?
Exactly.
Talk about experiential.
That's nomad science right there.
Right.
But here's the thing. As brilliant as he was, even Archimedes was ultimately limited by the demands of the state.
Oh, interesting.
Right. He was commissioned to build weapons, to design defenses,
Yeah.
to solve problems within the existing power structure.
So even his genius was still kind of funneled through that state agenda.
Exactly. And the text argues that this tension between nomad science and the state's desire to kind of control knowledge, it's been playing out for centuries.
And it makes you wonder, like, are we still stuck in that, like, in that state
Yeah.
way of thinking? Even now,
Yeah.
like our education system, our career paths, it all feels very
Very rigid.
rigid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is there another way?
It's a question worth asking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are we following these prescribed paths? Or are we forging our own? Are we embracing that spirit of experimentation and discovery?
It's so interesting to think about it that way, that the war machine isn't just about, like, literal war, but it's about, like, pushing those boundaries, challenging what we think we know.
Yeah, whether it's on a battlefield or in a laboratory or even just in our own minds.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
that drive to create something new,
And maybe,
break things along the way.
disrupt a system or two.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
I have to go look at a map now, I think. And maybe not use it.
There you go.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll catch you next time. Ever feel like, I don't know, we're just living in this, like, giant machine? And I don't mean some, sci-fi thing, but just money, jobs, the IRS, all that. We could kind of just accept it.
Well, yeah, like it's just natural or something.
Right. But what if this whole state thing, all this stuff, isn't some natural progression, but like a weird invention with its own messed up history?
Well, it's easy to assume the state was just what happened after, villages, tribes, whatever. But
Today's going to be a wild ride.
it is. Buckle up. We're going deep on this one, deep into Deleuze and Guattari.
Those are our guys for today's deep dive philosophers.
Ultimate decoders of power, those two.
Big time. And their book, Nomadology, it claims these really early states, and we're talking way back, Neolithic, they were some gradual development, more like.
Mega machines.
Yes. Built for one purpose.
Capture. And capture, not in the way we, usually picture it.
Right, not like conquering territory.
Deleuze and Guattari, they argue this capture force, it was acting on societies before the state as we picture it even existed.
Okay, hold up. How does a blueprint or a state or whatever, how does that act before it exists? That's some next level stuff.
It's like a phantom limb, almost, but it's leaving a real mark. In D&G, they break down 3 main mechanisms of this capture. So first up, land.
Okay, makes sense, right? Like land is important.
Always. But it's not just who lived where. It's the very idea of comparing land. This plot's more fertile, this one's got water rights. Suddenly you've got
Rent.
bingo, and a landlord class, the ones who control the best bits.
So just by deciding to compare, bam, hierarchy, like the original real estate game, but with way higher stakes.
Mechanism number 2, work. Same deal. Really, you start comparing and measuring activity, it turns into labor. Not helping your neighbor, but how much you produce, how efficiently.
Time is money, friend. That sounds familiar.
And that brings us to mechanism 3, the sneaky one, money. Early societies, they traded just fine, barter,
Yeah.
but the state, it creates money as we know it, not just for exchange, but to control value. You pay taxes in their currency.
So the whole market changes.
Exactly. It's not local customs anymore. It's controlled.
Wait, so even way back then, the state was basically manipulating the market. This isn't just some like ancient history lesson here. This is
now.
these systems. They're still running the show. So it's like what Deleuze and Guattari are saying, the rules of the game were like rigged from the start.
In a way, yeah. But here's where D&G, they take it even further, right? This control, this capture thing. Yeah. It was never absolute. There were always these leaks in the system, flows escaping.
So the more the state tried to like tighten its grip,
more slipped out.
It's kind of beautiful in a way, poetic.
It is. It's this constant push and pull. The state wants to overcode, right? Impose order on everything.
Yeah.
But then you've got these decoded flows resisting. They can't be categorized.
Okay, imagine trying to hold water in your hand, right? The tighter you squeeze.
More leaks out.
Exactly. Okay, but give me a real world example. How'd this play out in history?
Let's go to ancient China. Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about this historian, Ferntoke. He studied freed slaves.
Freed slaves.
Yeah. So in this superstructured society, right? Ancient China, freed slaves were these anomalies. Didn't fit the categories. Not peasant, not noble.
Decoded flows.
Precisely. Operating outside the system.
It's like the original gig workers or something.
Yeah.
But like way earlier.
And here's the thing, right? These individuals, no set place. They became the seeds of private property.
Oh, way.
And a new form of slavery, ironically. They could operate under the radar, accumulate wealth, even owning slaves themselves. It's like capitalism, it almost happened by accident. Multiple times throughout history.
So the state, it creates the conditions for its own downfall. That's a mind bender. But, okay, if these decoded flows, they were always around.
Yeah.
Why did capitalism take off when it did? What was different? So capitalism, it's like this glitch, always there waiting to,
explode.
Take over the whole system.
It's weird though, right? Because capitalism, it seems like it needs the state less, free markets, all that. But then...
It's a total paradox. I feel like we're always running into those with Deleuze.
Always. But that's what's so great. They make you think. So capitalism, it emerges when you've got naked labor, they call it. People with nothing to sell but their work.
Right, right.
And that collides with pure capital, money that just wants to, multiply.
And more money.
Exactly. And it wants to break down every barrier, turn everything into something you can buy and sell.
The whole world becomes a marketplace.
A deterritorialized marketplace, they'd say. No boundaries.
Okay, so then, why does the state even matter? If capitalism's all about, like, individual freedom, no rules.
Ah, see, that's the trick. States, they become like models of realization.
Models of what now?
It's like capitalism has these axioms, right? These core principles. But they need the state to make them real. Laws, institutions, global trade deals.
The infrastructure.
Exactly. Capitalism says free trade, but it needs the state to write the rules and to enforce them, of course.
And let's be real, capitalism creates a lot of mess for the state to clean up, too. Yeah. Inequality, environmental disasters, all that fun stuff.
Right. So it's this weird, I don't know, are we free individuals making choices, or are we just cogs in this capitalist machine that the state keeps running. It's like,
That's mind screw.
totally. And it gets even trippier, right? Because Deleuze and Guattari, they suggest, what if capitalism revived that ancient mega machine, the Urstadt, in a new form?
Hold on. Are we talking about, like, Skynet here?
Not quite. They call it the war machine.
Okay, now I am picturing Terminators.
It's not about literal war, right? It's how systems of control work, even in peacetime. Like they talk about Paul Virilio. He said we flipped Clausewitz on his head.
Wait, who flipped who?
Clausewitz, the war guy. He said war was the continuation of politics by other means. But Virilio, he's saying, nah, it's the opposite now. Politics is the continuation of war, just by different means.
So we're always at war.
In a way, yeah. Think about it. The news, it's always some crisis. Ads make you feel like you're not enough. We're constantly consuming, never satisfied. It's all control.
It's bleak, man. Are Deleuze and Guattari just trying to bum us out?
No way. They wouldn't do that. They give us hope, too. See, if the state and capitalism, they thrive on turning us into data points, predictable, controllable,
Right.
And the real power is what they call the non-denumerable, what can't be categorized.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
These are the points of escape, the minorities. And I don't mean like just demographics, right?
It's more than that.
Way more. It's any group creating their own values, disrupting the narrative. They don't play by the system's rules.
So, like, local communities fighting back against, I don't know, some big corporation.
Yeah.
Or artists doing their own thing.
Exactly. Online subcultures, whatever. They're creating spaces where the logic, it breaks down.
So it's not about overthrowing the system. It's more like finding the cracks.
Yeah.
And building something new there.
Building, creating, becoming. It's a call to action. That's Deleuze and Guattari, always making you think and do. So what unique perspective can you win? What norms can you challenge? What's your line of flight? That's what we want you to think about.
Boom. I love it. You heard it here, folks. Capture might be real, but the potential for escape, that's always there too. We're not just cogs in the machine. We can be the glitch. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and until next time, stay weird.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that might just reshape how you see the world around you, even how you think and work within it. Ever feel like you're stuck in a rigid routine, like life's a giant spreadsheet with no room for spontaneity?
Or maybe you thrive on that structure, but crave those moments of flow and inspiration.
Well, get ready to see things differently as we explore the fascinating concepts of smooth and striated spaces.
What's so captivating about these concepts is that we're not just talking about physical places, but how these ideas translate to music art, even the way we approach our work and personal lives.
And to guide us through this, we're turning to the work of philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, specifically their book, A Thousand Plateaus.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, philosophy, dense reading, maybe not the light podcast fare you were going for.
But trust me, we're here to distill the essence of their ideas, no jargon required, and show you how they're surprisingly relevant to your everyday experiences.
Consider this your express lane through some seriously thought-provoking material.
Exactly. So our mission today is to break down these concepts of smooth and striated spaces, and most importantly, explore why this matters to you.
Let's start with Deleuze and Guattari's basic definitions.
Right.
They use the term smooth space to describe something boundless, constantly changing, all about movement and exploration. Imagine a vast desert with shifting sands and no fixed center. That's the essence of smoothness.
Okay.
On the other hand, we have striated space, which is all about order-fixed points and predetermined paths. Think of a meticulously planned city grid or even something like a traditional factory production line.
Okay, so we've got boundless deserts versus organized grids.
Yeah.
But this idea of weaving versus felt that Deleuze and Guattari talk about, that's where it clicked for me. Weaving with its precise rows and structured patterns, that striated space and action, or you're following a predetermined plan. But felt, now that's interesting. It's made by pressing fibers together, a much more free-flowing, almost chaotic process, pure smoothness.
Right.
And, it makes you think even the clothes we wear, the fabrics we surround ourselves with, they can embody these concepts and even influence how we feel.
Precisely. And what's so fascinating is how Deleuze and Guattari use an unexpected example to illustrate smooth space patchwork quilts.
Yeah.
You might think quilts with their squares and patterns that has to be striated right. But think about how they're made, especially by those early American settlers. They used whatever scraps of fabric they had, often incorporating indigenous design influences. Each quilt was a unique creation born out of necessity and resourcefulness.
It's like this beautiful blend of structure and improvisation, wouldn't you say? And it makes you view those quotes in a whole new light. They become these testaments to adaptability, to making the most of what you have and creating something beautiful and functional in the process.
Absolutely. It highlights how even within what might seem like a striated system, elements of smoothness can emerge. But this goes beyond the physicality of quilts or deserts. Deleuze and Guattari argue that these concepts apply to something as abstract as music.
Now, this is where I get really interested. They talk about the composer Pierre Boulez and how he saw these concepts playing out in music. So are we talking smooth jazz versus, say, classical music? What did Boulez see as the defining characteristics?
You're right on track with that comparison. Boulez saw smooth music as being about flow and feeling like that improvisation in jazz. It's less about rigid structure and more about the journey the music takes you on. Think about how some jazz pieces feel like they're constantly evolving, almost as if the musicians are discovering the music in real time.
Yes.
That's the smooth dynamic at play.
Right.
Striated music, on the other hand, is more about structure and predetermined patterns like much of classical music.
It's fascinating how these concepts can be applied to something as abstract as music, yet they so clearly influence how we experience it. I mean, you put on some free-flowing jazz and it just hits differently than a tightly composed Bach concerto. Both have their place, of course, but understanding the smooth and striated elements helps us appreciate them on a deeper level.
Exactly. And this leads us to another fascinating application of these concepts, visual art. Deleuze and Guattari use the term nomad art to describe how smooth space manifests visually.
Okay.
Imagine those intricate patterns woven by nomadic cultures. They're filled with a sense of movement, constantly shifting forms. No single focal point demanding your attention.
So unlike a Renaissance painting where perspective and symmetry create this very structured, even hierarchical experience, nomad art is more about immersing yourself in the details, letting your eye wander and make its own connections.
That's a great way to put it. It's the difference between a carefully manicured garden and a wild, untamed forest. Both have their own beauty, but the way you experience them, the way they make you feel, that's where the smooth versus striated dynamic really shines.
Okay, so we've gone from deserts to quilts, from jazz to nomadic art. This is all incredibly fascinating, but let's bring this back down to earth for a moment. How do these seemingly abstract concepts actually apply to our everyday lives, to the challenges we face and the choices we make?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one Deleuze and Guattari were acutely aware of. They argue that understanding this interplay between smooth and striated spaces can be incredibly useful, particularly when it comes to things like work relationships and even personal growth.
Okay, so let's say you're feeling stuck in a rut at work. Deadlines are looming. Everything feels rigid and routine, basically like that metaphorical spreadsheet we talked about earlier. How does viewing the situation through a smooth space lens help? Would you even want to in that scenario?
That's where things get really interesting. Deleuze and Guattari were very aware of how capitalism, by its very nature, relies on striated systems, schedules, deadlines, quantifiable results. But they also recognize that within those rigid structures, new forms of smoothness are constantly emerging.
Okay.
Think about how technology has changed the way we work. Remote work, flexible schedules, collaborating with people across the globe, these introduce fluidity into a once very rigid system.
So it's almost like those patchwork quilts, again, finding creative ways to work within constraints, but also using those limitations to our advantage. It's not about abandoning structure entirely, but maybe finding those pockets of flexibility, those opportunities for creativity and innovation within the existing framework.
Precisely. And this concept extends beyond just our work lives. Think about travel, for example. I'm not just talking about physical journeys, but the way we approach learning and exploring new ideas.
You know, it's funny you mentioned travel. I was thinking we already covered that with the nomad art discussion, but I see what you're getting at. It's not just about the places we go, but how we approach the journey, both literally and intellectually.
It's exactly. Deleuze and Guattari argue that our very thinking can be smooth or striated. Smooth thinking is about embracing the unknown, making unexpected connections, and being open to having your perspective shifted. It's about the thrill of discovery, rather than clinging to fixed beliefs or predetermined paths. It's like that feeling of going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. You start with one question and end up in a completely different but fascinating corner of knowledge.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. But it does make you wonder, in a world that often seems to value structure and certainty, is there still room for this kind of smooth thinking? Or are we all destined to become cogs in the striated machine?
Yeah.
That's such a key question, and I think it speaks to a tension many of us feel. Is it even possible to exist in a purely smooth state? Or will those spaces always be reshaped or redefined by the need for structure?
It's a tough one. Deleuze and Guattari grapple with that very question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. They point out that even the most boundless landscapes, the most free-flowing creative movements, can eventually become systematized, even commercialized.
It's like that classic Joni Mitchell line, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Something that was once wild and open becomes, well, another grid.
Exactly. Think about how a pristine beach becomes a tourist destination, or how a revolutionary artistic movement becomes mainstream, almost predictable. But, and this is crucial, Deleuze and Guattari believe that even within these seemingly striated outcomes, new forms of smoothness can and will emerge. It's about seeking out those pockets of resistance, those spaces where new ways of thinking and creating can take root, even if it's just within ourselves or our immediate circles.
I love that. So it's not about striving for some utopian ideal of pure smoothness, because that might not even be sustainable. It's more about cultivating those smooth qualities, adaptability, openness, to experience that willingness to wander off the beaten path in the ways we move through the world, even if that world has its structures.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about recognizing that the interplay of smooth and striated is constant, always evolving. And it's often in those moments of transition, those shifts between order and chaos, where the most interesting possibilities emerge. We shouldn't be afraid of those shifts. In fact, that's where we can often tap into our most creative and adaptable selves.
I have to say, this entire conversation has been a journey in itself. It's amazing how two concepts, smooth and striated, can provide such a rich framework for understanding not just the world around us, but also our inner lives, or creative processes, even how we work.
That's the beauty of engaging with thinkers like Deleuze and Guattari. Their ideas have this incredible depth and reach, and they challenge us to see the world and ourselves in entirely new ways.
I'm already looking at everything a little differently. The layout of my city, the music I listen to, even the way I approach a work project. So for our listeners who are now hooked on these concepts, and I have a feeling there are many, what's something they can reflect on as they navigate their own smooth and striated spaces?
Here's a thought to ponder. Think about an area in your life, whether it's your work, a relationship, or even just your own thinking, where you feel stuck, confined by rules or expectations. Now, what would it look like to approach that situation with a smooth space mindset? Not about abandoning structure altogether, but seeking those points of flexibility, those opportunities for creative problem solving and unexpected solutions. It's amazing what can emerge when you embrace that flow.
Love that. Embrace the unknown, seek out the flow, and maybe even stitch together a patchwork quilt while you're at it. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of smooth and striated spaces. We'll see you next time, ready to dive into a whole new topic.
Okay, get ready for a deep dive into Deleuze and Guattari.
It's going to be a wild ride.
We're talking abstract machines, assemblages, strata-heady stuff. But don't worry, this isn't about getting lost in jargon.
Right. We want to give you a handle on these concepts, make them make sense.
Because trust me, once you see the world through their lens...
It's like things click, you know?
Totally.
So who were these guys?
Deleuze and Guattari, two French thinkers, real rule breakers.
Challenging every norm about power, how we know things, what's real even.
Dense writing. For sure.
But mind-blowing, too. They give us completely new ways to think.
And at the core, it's all connected, always shifting, becoming something new.
Right. And that's where strata come in. I gotta say, I love a good metaphor.
Who doesn't?
And when they compared strata to the judgment of God, my curiosity was piqued. Oh yeah, that'll get your attention. But it's not as out there as it sounds.
How so?
They're talking about layers of reality, the fundamental stuff. Physicochemical, organic, anthropomorphic, they call them.
Okay, those are some words. Break it down for me.
Imagine Earth, billions of years ago, forming. Rocks, minerals, pure matter, that's the physicochemical.
Gotcha.
Then life pops up. Plants, animals, the whole web, right? That's organic.
Makes sense.
Last layer, everything we make. Cities, languages, tech, even our ideas. The anthropomorphic.
So it's like these layers are stacked, each one influencing everything else.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They're not neat and separate. They're mixing, blurring.
Give me an example. How do these layers actually intersect?
Think about technology. totally anthropomorphic, right? But
Yeah.
it's directly affecting our biology.
Which is organic.
Exactly. Gene editing, AI making decisions for us, even how social media messes with our sleep, the lines are getting blurry.
It's this crazy dance, the natural and the artificial all mixed up.
Exactly. And that's where assemblages come in.
So assemblages are like what happens because of this dance between strata,
Love that way of putting it. Like unique formations emerging from how these layers interact.
but not just things, right?
No way. Processes, relationships, systems, anything where those different strata elements click together.
So if strata are the ingredients,
Yeah,
assemblages are the dishes you cook up.
precisely. Think about a city. Perfect example.
Because you've got the actual landscape, then buildings on top of that, people interacting, the economy,
Mhm.
all these layers.
Bingo. Or a protest movement, people with a goal, using signs, maybe actions like marches, all different strata coming together in this unique assemblage.
And that's where territorialization comes in, right? They stake out their own space, these formations.
You got it. Territorialization, meaning they create their own boundaries, their zone of influence.
But not always a physical territory, is it?
Nope. Think of a brand like Nike.
Okay.
They've made a territory, not just stores, but in our culture, our desires, their logo, the athletes they sponsor. It all builds their territory in our minds.
So how do we go from territory to how these assemblages actually work? So we've got these assemblages, these territories of ideas and actions, but what makes them tick? How do they actually function?
Deleuze and Guattari give us two key axes to understand how they work: content, expression, and territorialization/deterritorialization.
Okay, gotta admit, those sound a bit intimidating.
They're just big words. Think of content as the what and expression as the how of an assemblage.
Okay, so for a protest movement, what would be the content?
The people, their demands, the leaflets, the chants, the raw material, so to speak,
In the expression.
how that's communicated, the signs, the emotions, the media coverage, how the message resonates.
So content is the substance, expression is how it takes shape,
Yeah.
interacts with the world.
Exactly. Now, layer on territorialization and deterritorialization, we know assemblages create territories.
Right, they stake their claim.
But they're never static, always in flux.
So territorialization is setting boundaries, and deterritorialization is breaking free from them.
You got it. And that's where it gets really interesting. Every assemblage can deterritorialize, become something new.
So our protest movement, what would deterritorialization look like for them?
Imagine it explodes, starts online, spills onto the streets, grabs media attention. People who didn't care before, they're engaging, the message is spreading, evolving. The movement's initial demands might even change with all these new voices. That's deterritorialization in action.
Breaking free from those initial confines and becoming something bigger.
Exactly. And that potential exists in everything, from art to technology. Look at the internet itself. Started for academics.
Right, sharing research and stuff.
Exactly. Then boom, deterritorialized. This massive network changing how we do, well, almost everything.
It's amazing how something so niche became so transformative.
The power of deterritorialization, but it's not always smooth or predictable. There's pushback, forces trying to keep things the same.
A tug of war between territorialization and deterritorialization.
Exactly. They call these lines of force. Molar lines, molecular lines, and lines of flight.
Okay, hit me with those. They sound like a Deleuzian brain teaser.
Not so bad. Molar lines are the forces of order. Structures, institutions, norms, the dominant ways of doing things.
So for the internet, what would those be?
Government regulations, corporate control of data, even those algorithms deciding what you see on social media, trying to impose order on this chaotic network.
Keeping things from going off the rails.
Exactly. But then you've got the molecular lines, the forces of flux, of disruption, cracks in the pavement, those unexpected connections that challenge the established order.
So for the internet, would that be like independent media, online activism, just people using technology in unpredictable ways?
Exactly. Those bottom-up forces always pushing against the control of the molar lines.
So we've got this tension between order and change. But what about those lines of flight? Where do those fit in?
Lines of flight. Those are the exciting ones. The moments of true rupture, breakthroughs, escapes from that tug of war. They ignite real transformation, open up things that were unimaginable before.
The wild cards that can shake things up and create something totally new.
Exactly. Like when the World Wide Web was invented, it didn't just happen within the existing structure of the early internet. It was a line of flight, a radical departure that totally transformed how we connect and communicate.
It's like those cracks in reality where true innovation emerges.
You've got it. But here's the catch. Lines of flight aren't always positive. They can be co-opted, reterritorialized.
What do you mean?
Think about a revolutionary tech that becomes a tool for surveillance, or a social movement with radical ideals that gets institutionalized, loses its edge. Even lines of flight have their dangers.
So even when you think you've broken free, you can get pulled back into the same patterns.
Exactly. It's this constant dance, negotiating these forces. And that brings us to one of Deleuze and Guattari's most challenging concepts, the body without organs.
Okay, I have to admit, that name always throws me. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie. What is the body without organs? Why is it so important to their thinking?
It's a name designed to make you think differently. It's not a physical body, but a plane of pure potential, becoming before it's molded into a fixed form.
Okay, so can you give me an example? How does that abstract concept work in the real world?
Imagine a jazz musician improvising a solo, not bound by a score, right? Tapping into something deeper, more fluid, drawing on their skills, emotions, connection with other musicians, creating something new in the moment. That process, that's a glimpse of the body without organs at work.
So it's like a source of raw creative energy where anything is possible before it's defined or given structure.
Exactly. The virtual realm of pure potentiality existing alongside the actual world of concrete forms. We can't ever fully access it, but we can approach it.
Like a horizon we're always moving towards but can never quite reach.
Exactly. And that striving, that constant experimentation with new forms, that's what makes life interesting. It allows us to break free and create something truly new.
This is all fascinating. But we haven't talked about abstract machines yet. Where do they fit in with all of this?
You're right. Can't forget those. They're essential to how all of these concepts connect.
Okay, so what are they then?
In the simplest terms, abstract machines drive deterritorialization, disrupt the strata, break down assemblages, and propel us towards that body without organs.
So they're like catalysts for change and transformation.
Exactly. But they're not physical machines, more like diagrams, functions, or processes operating within and between assemblages, invisible forces shaping how we think, feel, and interact.
Okay, that's where it gets a bit tricky for me. Got a concrete example.
Think about language. Not a physical object, right? But it shapes how we understand everything. It lets us communicate, categorize, create meaning. But it can also limit us, trap us in predefined boxes.
So language both creates boundaries and lets us challenge those boundaries.
Exactly. And that's the thing about abstract machines. They're not inherently good or bad, just forces we need to be aware of, learn to use creatively and ethically.
This is really starting to click. But are there different types of abstract machines?
You're good at picking up on that. Often overlooked, but crucial to how this all works. There isn't just one type, but multiple, each with its own function.
My mind is blown. So what are they and how are they different?
Deleuze and Guattari identify three main types: consistency machines, stratification machines, and overcoding machines. And their names give you a clue to their functions.
Okay, tell me everything. What do these different machines do?
So Deleuze and Guattari identify three main types: consistency machines, stratification machines, and overcoding machines. And as you might expect, their names offer some clues to their functions.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for me. What do these different abstract machines do?
Well, consistency machines are those that operate on the plane of the body without organs. They're the forces that generate new connections, that create flows and intensities, that push us towards deterritorialization and becoming. They're the wild cards, the engines of creativity and change.
So they're like the rebels, the disruptors, the ones who challenge the status quo.
Exactly. They're the ones who say, why not? Who refuse to be confined by the limits of what is considered possible or acceptable. They're the artists, the revolutionaries, the visionaries who dare to imagine a different world.
I love that. But what about those other types of abstract machines? What about the stratification machines and the overcoding machines? They don't sound quite as exciting.
Well, they're definitely not the rebels of the bunch, but they play a crucial role in Deleuze and Guattari's framework. Stratification machines are essentially the forces that work to maintain order and stability. They're the ones that create structures, hierarchies, and systems of organization.
So they're like the architects, the planners, the ones who make sure society runs smoothly.
Exactly. They're the ones who create the rules, the laws. the institutions that govern our lives. They're not necessarily bad or oppressive. In fact, they're often necessary for creating a functioning society, but they do have a tendency to limit our freedom and creativity if they become too dominant.
I see what you mean. It's like that old saying, rules are made to be broken, right? We need some structure to avoid chaos, but too much structure can stifle innovation and growth.
Precisely. It's all about finding that delicate balance between order and chaos, stability and change.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those last ones, the overcoding machines? What do they do?
Overcoding machines are a bit more complex, but essentially they work to reinforce and maintain existing power structures. They're the forces that impose meaning, that control narratives, that shape our desires and beliefs to align with the dominant ideology.
So they're like the propagandists, the spin doctors, the ones who manipulate us into conforming.
You could say that, yes. They're the ones who create the grand narratives that we live by, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what's important. They're often invisible, operating beneath the surface of our awareness, but they have a profound impact on how we see the world and our place within it.
Wow, that's kind of scary when you think about it. It's like we're constantly being bombarded by these invisible forces trying to shape our thoughts and behaviors.
It's true. But here's the good news. Once you become aware of these forces, once you learn to recognize their tactics, they lose some of their power over you. It's like learning a magic trick. Once you know how it's done, it's not quite as impressive anymore.
I like that analogy. So it's not about trying to escape these forces entirely, because that's probably impossible. It's about becoming more conscious of them, more critical of the messages we're being fed, and more empowered to make our own choices.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our agency, our ability to think for ourselves and create our own realities. And that's what's so exciting about Deleuze and Guattari's work. It's not just a bunch of abstract philosophical concepts. It's a toolkit for understanding and navigating the complexities of the world we live in.
It's like they've given us a map of the matrix, and now we have a choice. We can stay plugged in and let the system control us, or we can unplug and start creating our own realities.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's a choice we face every day in every aspect of our lives.
So, to recap, we've got strata, assemblages, abstract machines of different types. It's a lot to take in. How can our listeners start to apply these concepts to their own lives?
Well, I think the first step is simply to start paying attention. Pay attention to the ways in which your life is structured, the forces that shape your thoughts and behaviors, the patterns that repeat themselves over and over again.
It's about becoming more aware of the water we're swimming in, so to speak.
Exactly. Once you start to see those patterns, those structures, those machines at work, you can start to ask yourself some critical questions.
Like what?
Like, whose interests do these structures serve? What are they preventing me from doing or being? How can I disrupt these patterns and create new possibilities for myself?
It's about becoming more conscious, more critical, and ultimately more empowered.
I love it. This has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Deleuze and Guattari's thinking.
That's the beauty of their work. It's endlessly generative. The more you explore it, the more connections you make, the more questions it raises.
It's like that infinite library in the Interstellar movie. Every time you open a door, you discover a whole new universe of possibilities.
Exactly. And that's what makes this journey so exciting. There's always more to discover, more to explore, more to create.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into Deleuze and Guattari. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this wild ride.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring these mind-bending concepts with us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep becoming.